あ、あ、あせっかくだから、録画しとこうか。まだかな。まだかな。おいおい。来てんだけどな。あ、来た。はい。これで、これだけある。はいはい。これで、YouTube、あ、はい。あら、見えてんのかな。あ見えてんのかな。あれ変わってない。あなんだっけ名前。待って。これか。Making the switch from creepy to unreal. NG4。はい。保存。そして、どこだ。ゲームじゃない。あれ。そして、ゲームじゃない。あ、見えてるね。もう、見る会。少し。これよし。保存。で、どこだ。もうちょっと待ってね。ツイッターでシェアをします。これで、なんだ。試すんだ。そして、YouTube のリンクは、これ。じゃあ、Twitter、YouTube、はい。いいかな。ショールーム。 これで、あとなんかあるかな。はい。それでね、あとは、ちょっと待ってね。ブラウザが、ちょっと、ブラウザに捨ててくれ。よっ。これいけるか。で、どこ行った？ないやんけー。で、どこ行った？なんか微妙に見切れてる？ないやんけー。大丈夫これ。見切れてんじゃん。どこ行った？なんか微妙に見切れてる？ないやんけー。大丈夫。音声が20。なんか微妙にさ、YouTube 見切れてるな。しょうがないの？見切れて？はい。YouTube か？バグって？あ、治ったか。一人で、歌を出しています。一応ね、チャットを拾えるように、ウィンドウを整理しております。それで、メモ用のね、エディターも開いておきます。よいしょ。あった。モニターが狭いよ。よいしょ。これで見える。やったー。さて。じゃあ動画を見ます。今日は勉強会です。全部英語です。一応字幕が出ることを確認したので、それで、なんとかね、頑張りまーす。はい。
Hello
ちょっとね、音大きかったでって。
and welcome to Unity to Unreal Fundamentals. In this course, we'll explore the world of Unreal Engine from the perspective of a Unity user. We'll look at the basics of project setup and file management to working with assets, rendering, and animation. This course aims to help you translate Unity terminology and workflows into the Unreal Engine environment. Furthermore, this course is built as a reference point between the Unity and Unreal Engine environments, and is not by any means an in-depth tutorial or how-to for certain workflows. Throughout this course, you will see the use of some of the free content from the Unreal Engine Marketplace, which you can download and use in any of your Unreal projects or for learning more about Unreal Engine workflows. Thanks for joining and enjoy the course.
はい。イントロが終わりました。要するにあれですね。Unity からアンリアルに乗り換えるときのワークフロー紹介するよっていうだけのやつですね。大したことは言ってなかった。これを見よ
When it comes to creating new projects in Unity, you might be familiar with something like this, and this is what you're greeted with for working with existing projects or setting up a new project. you have up on the top here Projects and Learn as the two basic tabs to work with. Now in the Learn tab, it gives access to tutorials and various learning resources. And on the project side, you would see if you have existing projects, this area populated with listings of existing projects that you may be working with. Of course, up here, if you have other projects, you could click on the Open button, or you could simply click this New or this New Project button here to go in and be able to give a project name, the location where it's going to live, and select things like a Unity template to be able to work with. Now, it's important that I'm pointing out all of these different various areas here because those certain exact same terminologies exist in the way we work with Unreal Engine. However, we work with this in a little bit of a different way. We like to access all of these different resources through the Epic Games Launcher. Now, the Epic Games Launcher is a much more robust way of accessing all of these different items in the way that what we have is very familiar type of structure here in this sense that we have a library tab, and in here it gives you access to a variety of versions of engines if you want. Now in this case, as an example, I have in here a previous version of Unreal Engine and a current version of the engine here. Now I could stack up into this tab as many versions as I want, and that's useful for if I'm working on a production pipeline locked to a specific engine for whatever reason. I could be able to go back and forth for projects that I was working with within that production specifically to that engine. But like I said, I can have as many different versions of the engine in here if I wanted to for whatever reason that may be. Now, this is where we would launch our engine, but as you can see in the My Projects area, this is much.
一応、この辺で一回切って、何っていうか簡単に言うと、このですね、Unity のプロジェクトの作り方とか、ラン、あれですね、学習用のコンテンツは、Unity Hub で見たような作りと一緒だよねという話をして、その後、上のとこね、4.1、7.2とか書いてるとこに、エンジンを増やせるよと。違うバージョンのエンジンをね、こっから増やせるよっていう話を今までしてました。その次、マイプロジェクトの説明に入るようです。
Much the same as what we would see in the Unity area there, where you would have a list of projects. So this would be a list of existing projects that I have. We also have down below this area called the Vault, and this shows different plugins or different levels or sample content that I may have access to as well, locked to my account. So these are some things that I've worked with here previously. Now we mentioned the Learn tab in the Unity project startup. Here we have a Learn tab, of course, in the Unreal world of things here, where we can simply go in and have access to things like tutorials, documentation, community wikis, and different things like that. So we have access to, unlimited resources here for learning. And on the note of the community, we also have access to a community tab on its own, which gives you things like different kinds of forums, roadmaps ahead for development, and as well as blog entries of some really interesting things going on in the world of Unreal Engine. Now, the Epic Games Launcher is, of course, much more than just a place to just start a project or something. Really, it is this kind of landing page to access all of these different resources, whether you want to learn something or you want to acquire an asset from something like the marketplace, which we'll come and take a look at a little bit later, or if you want to be able to interact with the community in a number of different ways to maybe learn some things here. But as well, it's also this launch pad for things like, if you're familiar with, of course, the game Fortnite, or any other kind of different game.
一回切ろうか。要するにあれですね。この UE4 のランチャーはいいぞ。 という話をしていましたね。コミュニティのウィキとか、めっちゃ、ブログとかあるよと。それがこっから飛べるんだよと。いう話をね、していました。で、上のタブを切り替えると、別のがあるよという話を、ここからします。
Like if you're familiar with, of course, the game Fortnite, or any other kind of different games that you may have in here. There's also a modding area for working with building mods, working with Unreal Tournament here so that you can actually build, different mods of things in there. So it is this real kind of landing page of this launch pad of all these different resources. Now, for us to set up a project here in Unreal Engine, we've looked at how that it's similar in the way that we have existing projects. Let's take a look at how we would start a new project or set up a new project in Unreal Engine. Well, I'm working with this current engine right here, so I'll just simply click Launch, and what's going to happen is that I'm essentially launching the Unreal Engine, or as we refer to it, the Unreal Editor. And what this will allow me to do is have access to, current projects that I may be working with, but I want to click on the New Project tab here. So I'll click on that, and you're going to see that we have a couple of different tabs here. Now, the basic two are Blueprint and C++. Unreal Studio is a completely different version of Unreal Engine in the way that it's actually Unreal Engine at the core, but it has access to a few plugins to allow you to work with enterprise data like CAD data, architectural data, and things like that. So right now I want to focus on these two tabs, Blueprint and C++. They really are actually, at the end of the day, the same engine that is going to achieve the same result, and that is for you to develop and work and build on your project. The difference is in the way that we access or set up the basic project for you. One of them is purely scripting based or code based here, and in the world of Unreal Engine we use C++. The other one here, Blueprint, is what we have that is, it's kind of the non-coding side or the non-scripting side. And we use what we have for the world of visual scripting that we call blueprints. And in here, you can see that we have a number of different templates set up. From a first-person perspective or maybe a third-person perspective, there's augmented reality and virtual reality templates, all sorts of different templates in there. And you'll see similar ones over here in the C++ on the programming or scripting side of them as well. Now, a little later on, we'll look at how you can interact with both of those worlds of the scripting or the visual scripting worlds, regardless of which project you're in. But just for now, what I want to do is actually just simply start up a new project. And in here, if I wanted to start up something maybe like a blank project or whatever it is, I would just simply click and select that. In this case, I'm just going to select blank. I would give it a name, much like what we saw in the Unity world here. I would give it a name of my project, and I would just simply go ahead and create project. And what that's simply going to do, so if I wanted to call this in here right now, my test project, I just simply hit create project, and it's going to go ahead and create a whole new project in here for me. And essentially what's going on behind the scenes here is setting up the Unreal project directory, which we're going to come to in a little bit, and we're going to compare that to how that works, very similar to what you might be familiar with other engines, for example, as Unity. But as we can see here now, we're into the engine. We've set up our basic project. That's a basic overview there of the differences between the Unity starting screen for starting up a project and how we use the Epic Game Launcher for accessing content and resources to launch or set up a brand new project.
はい。
You're going to see that we
あれで
have
すね。この辺で、プロジェクトを作るよっていう話をしてて、テンプレートはいっぱいあるよと。なんか一人称とか、三人称のテンプレートがあるので、まあそれを選んで作っていいよと で、プロジェクト名をつけるのも、Unity と一緒だね、という話をして、名前変えて、起動して、これが標準のビューだよと。で、なんか軽く締めて、終わりました。じゃあ次行きましょう。はい。はい、はい。
A common ground between just about any game engine is the overall project structure setup. And that is that a game engine typically relies on a specific structure for a project to be able to access content and assets. So here we're looking at Unity, and we can see that the Unity project setup here, we see that there's an assets folder, a library folder, packages, and some other basic folders that store specific content for Unity and for that specific project. Now we can see in the Unity UI that we have what matches some of this here. So we're seeing assets and we're seeing scenes. Now if we go back to the Windows version of this here, I'm using Windows here, we can see that we have assets, and if we click on that, there's that same folder, scenes. So this is important to note here that for this Unity project, we're able to see here in this specific area here, the project settings over here in Unity, and how it works within Windows. Now let's compare that to Unreal Engine, and we'll see that things are actually quite similar. So I'm also going to open up, I have an Unreal Engine project here, and we can see that in a very similar setup here that we have access to different content related to this project in here. So we can see there's a basic content folder, and if I click on that, we can see that we have access to all these different pieces or areas of assets stored in a different structure here, or different folder structures depending on what the content is. So if we go back to that here, and let me actually just bring the Unity one up as well, side by side, we can see that there is actually some familiarity here. So as we looked at in the Unity project setup, we have assets, and we saw that scenes directory in there as mimicked or directly copied in the Unity user environment. And we can see that here as well, that we have in the Unreal project setting, we have a content directory, much like we're seeing here in the user interface here in the user environment for Unreal Engine. And we have that content folder here. Now, if I click on that, I can see all of the exact same folders that exist within the UI there as well. So the project structure here is actually quite similar when it comes down to the basics of how things are set up between Unity and Unreal. And one of the things you'll notice is the naming of things. So assets in Unity and content as that root folder here in Unreal Engine. So let me just bring that Unity version up here as well once more.
はい。ちょっと長くなったけど、大体ですね、適当に解説すると、Unity と Unreal のフォルダ構造の話をね、していました。で、それぞれ、フォルダ構成は似てるんだけど、フォルダの名前だけ、ちょっと違うよという話をしていました。Unity は、アセッツ、Unreal だと、コンテント、というだけですね。あとはなんか大したこと言ってない。
And we can see that the basics that we have in there, so assets being what would be equivalent to what we're working with here in Unreal Engine, is our content folder where we store all of our data and all of our content. And that's important to note the way that both environments set up their project structures. And that is that anything that I do within their respective user interface is going to save those assets or that content to these structures or these directories here. And likewise, if I do anything in Windows, if I bring in an asset or update it here, I can update that in the UI just the same way so that I can actually access content through that way. But either way, the project structure that is set up for Unity, the basics of it at its core there, and in the basics of as to what we're seeing here in Unreal Engine are quite similar. And as long as we know that where content lives in the Unity world under an assets folder, as an example, and content lives in the Unreal world under a content folder in here, then it becomes quite easy to become familiar with where pieces of information live. So there it is right there as to a comparable in that overall project structure overview between Unity and Unreal Engine.
また。次。はい。どんどん行こう。眠くなってきた。
Let's take a look at how files are managed or assets are managed within Unreal Engine as it compares to Unity. So that we can see here we have Unreal Engine. By the way, I'm using the Zen Garden scene file, which actually you can grab the entire project from if you're curious. From the Marketplace here, the Marketplace tab, within the Epic Games Launcher, you can see Epic Zen Garden. It's a free content that you can simply grab. You can download the entire project, and you'll have access to all of the assets and project files that I'm working with here. Now, we talked about the basics in project structure between Unity and Unreal. Let's take a look at how we manage some of the files here between the two different products. So we mentioned previously here that in Unity, we have a very similar setup here, that we have this project tab where we can get in and see basically a thumbnail view here on the right, and we can see a hierarchical structure as to where content or assets are stored in Unity. And as we've seen here in Unreal, it's actually quite similar. Now, if I just click on this little tiny tab here that has an arrow with something that represents a hierarchical structure there, I can just click that, and I get a very similar setup if we go back to Unity as to what we are seeing here between the two environments. And what I have in here is all of the different content that is listed here, and I have it in a hierarchical kind of outline type of structure, as well as a thumbnail sort of view here. Now, as mentioned previously in the project structure, we can see that between Unity and Unreal, that we can see the mirroring of that in the Windows environment. So I'm using Windows here, and here I am in Unreal Engine. Here's my project, Epic Zen Garden. Here's that content structure down below. Now I can double click on content, and I will see that mirrored exactly as to what I'm seeing in Unreal Engine here. It's important to note the way we work with files in here that is very similar to the way you might be familiar with in the world of Unity. Some different naming, though, to keep in mind. Now, we saw in the Unity environment there was a scenes directory in there. So Unity scenes is something that you'd be very familiar with. Well, here we have what we refer to as maps. So in here, we have a variety of different maps saved. And this is the way we would work with our files or our scene files in Unreal Engine. So as we create something, and if we want to save it as a scene, we'd simply go up to File, Save As, and we can go to Save Current As, and it's actually essentially creating a level, or for that matter, a map. And that's what you see here. These are all different maps that we work with that work or operate as scenes. So if you're familiar with the idea of scenes in Unity, this is the way we work in Unreal Engine, is we build these levels that we save as Unreal Engine maps. And that's where we store all of our different content as that type of primary asset, or that primary asset type, which is a map in the Unreal Engine world. And in there is where we can...
はい。まあ、あれですね。 はい。YouTube の方こんばんは。ですね、簡単にここまで要約すると、エピックゼンガーデンだっけかっていうアセットがありまして、それを入れたよと。で、フォルダ構成とか、見てみると、ユニティとだいたい一緒だねと。なんかちょっとビリビリしてる。はい。で、そう。ユニティだと、シーンズだったのが、アンリアルだと、マップスだよという話をしてました。
Store and utilize that much like the same way of working with scenes, but we can use these to actually be different levels for, say, for example, a game project, and actually have completely different assemblages of content for very different maps as it may be for each one. Now, back to what we were saying for the way that files are managed in there, we can see here in the Windows version, of course, we're seeing exactly the same thing in there. And if I double click on the maps, here's all of our maps here. And just to point out the way that Unreal Engine saves its content, you'll see things like, for example, the way Unity might save its scene files. Well, here we save a .u, in this case, map. So for our map file, we save it as a .u map. Now, any assets that we save, anything that has to do with the content within that map, we save as a .u asset. And you can see that in this maps folder here. So in the thumbnail view, in the content browser in Unreal Engine, we can see that we have all of these different maps. There's a whole bunch of different maps available here for this Zen Garden project. And with each map is its build data registry. And that essentially is kind of a list of all of that content or components that are relevant to that specific map. And you can see that here we have the Zen Audio, there's Zen Audio build data, Zen Background 2, Zen Background 2 build data, and so on. So the file management structure here is something that if you're familiar with Unity, I think it's very easy to get very comfortable rather quickly here in Unreal Engine, because it is actually set up in a very similar environment in the way that we have this kind of thumbnail view and this outline or hierarchical structure here view as well, so that you can access the files in there. And as long as you know some of the basics as to the way things are named, in the Unity scene environment or a scene file, and in Unreal Engine we work with maps. And here to create folders to store this, and that's essentially what was done when this project would have been built. Individuals would go through and actually just simply create folders as they go. And the way this works here is we simply just right click, and all we have to do here is we can click a new folder. And if I was building
はい。ちょっと中途半端だけど、一回切ります。さっき出てきたこの辺の話ね。これは、レベル、ユニティでいうシーンですね。に紐づくビルドデータっていう、マップビルドデータレジストリーっていうファイルが、セットで出て、セットでできるやと。いう話をしてました。これは、去年ぐらいだったかな。で、このデータが生成されるようになって、ビルドしたレベルの情報を持ってるので、なんかゴミだと思って消さないようにねっていうぐらいかな。はい。で、なんか、 自分でレベルを作るようで。
What we have to do here is we can click a new folder. And if I was building new content in here, let's say, for example, it was, maybe it's a special type of different effects or something in there, I could create an effects folder, even though we have an effects spelled out folder. But if I had something different in here, that's simply all I would do is create that folder and be able to dive in and be able to populate this with the content specific to whatever that folder is there. And that's much the same as the way we would work with this in Unity. Being able to simply create a new folder and organize your content. No different here in Unreal Engine. It's important to keep your content organized, keep your project directory organized nice and clean, and to do that we simply create folders to be able to store all of our different data. So there's an overview there as to how we work with file management within Unreal Engine, specifically within the content browser area here within the Unreal Engine UI.
はい。要するに、アセット、マーケットプレイスとか、なんかゲットしてきたアセットをですね、ポイポイ置いてこないで、ほんと片付けてねっていう締めでしたね。はい。次行きます。
When it comes to navigating any kind of 3D software, it's always important to know the basics of how to move around within the scene or the viewport. And of course, that's no different with working within a game engine. Well, the interesting thing and the exciting thing here, the great thing about this, if you're coming from the Unity
一応、説明しとくと、さっきのプロジェクトと一緒です。違うレベル、名義でいうシーンを開いてるだけです。いや、同じシーンかな。同じやつです。
Unity world to Unreal Engine, you're going to jump in and find it very familiar right off the bat. So let's jump in and look at some of the basic navigation controls here for the Unreal Engine viewport. So now if you're used to Unity's scene view, you're probably used to using the Alt key and or the default setup for that matter, the Alt key and the left mouse button for simply orbiting or tumbling around in the viewport or the scene view.
この辺から、よく大事そうなので、ちょっと細切れにしようかな。ですね、Unity だと、ボルトを押しながら、カメラを回転させてたのが、アンリアルだと左クリックだけで良い。
And just the same here in Unreal Engine. And if we take the Alt key and the middle mouse button, we can go and simply do a pan or a move effect in the viewport. And of course, using Alt and right click, it allows us to do a zoom or a scroll wheel zoom, just the same as as the way Unity works there as well.
あれですね。ミドルボタンを押すと、なんか横に動くよと。ホイールのとこですね。これを置いて押してねと。で、右クリック、ちょっと来すぎた。ボルト
Alt and right click, it allows us to do a zoom or a scroll wheel zoom, just the same as as
はい。ボルトクリックと、スクロールのズームホイール回すやつは、一緒だよ。やつかな。あんま使わないのでわかんない。
the way Unity works there as well. So you'll find that to be very comfortable or very much the same as within the world of Unity. Something else that's worth noting here as you navigate or work around are the fly-through keys. So for example, W, A, S, and D. Works exactly the same way if you're coming over from Unity and here to Unreal Engine, simply by holding down the right mouse button and then working with things like, for example, the W key. I can fly forward, S for backwards, A and D.
まあ大体 Unity と一緒なんだけど、WASD を押すと、カメラ移動できるんだけど、アンリアルの場合は、右クリック押しながら、うん。そうだね。押しながら、
Forward, S for backwards, A and D for left and right. It's also worth noting that something that Unity users would be familiar with. If I want to frame in on an object, I can simply click an object in my viewport and then just simply hit F. Exactly the same way that you'd be used to working with an object or framing an object.
はい。選択したオブジェクトに、フォーカス当てるのは、Unity と一緒で F ですねと。
In Unity. And it's also worth noting that, of course, once an object is framed using that F hotkey, it is now the center of focus, meaning that as I tumble or orbit around, I'm orbiting around that object that is highlighted here in the Unreal Engine viewport. So
なんか若干自慢してきました。フォーカス当てると、それ中心に回るよと。せっかくだから、エディター起動しといて動作チェックしよう。適当なこと言ってないようにね。少々お待ちを。エディター起動して、合ってるかどうかね、ちゃんとね。実際に操作して、チェックします。4.19 の適当なプロジェクト。いいか。まあなんか大体、話し方聞いてる感じだと、Unity は、こうやって操作するよと。アンリアルは、こうやって操作するよと。で、言った後に、アンリアルは、さらにここが優れてるよという喋り方をするので面白いですね。皮肉が入ってる。これはね、ちょっと面白いですね。日本語版出してほしいな。誰がこの皮肉を込めた動画を撮るのか。字幕かもしれないけど。びっくりです。せっかくだから、またツイートしとこうかな。なんか意外とね、まだ優しいパートなので、対して、優しいパートなので、そんなにああ、見てますね。合ってた。はい。
down, I'm orbiting around that object.
あ、これ試してなかった。どうやってやるんだこれ。 一回説明をしてください。はい。
Same way that you'd be used to working with an object or framing an object in Unity. And it's also worth noting that, of course, once an object is framed using that F hotkey, it is now the center of focus, meaning that as I tumble or orbit around, I'm orbiting around that object that is highlighted here in
待ってね。なんか適当に完全に見えないところでやってますが。こうして、どうやってやるんだ。もう一回、英語がわからない人、何回か見てます。どうしてほしい。
used to working with an object or framing an object in Unity. And it's also worth noting that, of course, once an object is framed using that F hotkey, it is now the center of focus, meaning that as I tumble or orbit around, I'm orbiting around that object that is highlighted here in the Unreal Engine viewport. So there's a quick overview of the comparables between navigating the view.
どうやってやるんだ。フォーカスされないんだが。どうなってるんだ。っていいですか。これか。本操作。本操作のスライドを見ています。本操作分かってない。やべえ。教えるってレベルじゃねえぞ。あれ書いてないな。フォーカスして、その後さ、フォーカスしたままさ、ぐるぐる回すやつどうやってやるの。どこわかんないな。ちょっと調べときます。間違った。これだ。
Viewport, if you're coming from the Unity world into the Unreal Engine world.
終わった。SK のフォーカスしたまま回すやつ。調べ。次だ。
Let's take a look at the different components or panels of the Unity user interface as it compares to the Unreal Engine user interface. So quickly here in Unity, we can really kind of pare down the Unity interface into 5 areas plus menus. So what I mean by that is we have these different panels that we're working with in here, and we have this menu set up top. So we'll come to how this works within Unreal here in a moment, but you will see that there are some things that are very comparable and actually are very similar in the Unreal Engine UI as well. So, of course, up here at the top here, we have a basic toolbar within Unity. And on the far left, we have what we refer to in Unity as the hierarchy panel. And then in the viewport, in Unity, it's referred to as the scene view. And then, of course, we have on the right, typically you'll see, is the inspector panel. And this gives you all the attributes or details related to an object. In this case, I have a cube placed in the scene. I have the cube selected, and whenever I have an object selected, whether it's by the hierarchy panel or from the object in the scene view, I will get all the details or attributes or parameters associated with that object that I've selected there in this inspector view. And then down below, of course, we have this Unity project browser. And we see that there's a hierarchy type of structure or an outline type of structure on the left and a thumbnail type of view of all the different assets or pieces of content related to that same structure there that lives here on the right. So those are kind of the 5 basic panels plus this menu set across the top. Now let's take a look at how this relates within the world of Unreal Engine.
はい。要するに、Unity で見ていた、この配置ヒエラルキーって言ってたけど、ハイエラルキーだったね、なんかね。ちょっと違ったね。それと、プロジェクトとか、シーンのあたり、右側とか、優しいので、こっちと一緒だよねと。いう風に並び替えて、デフォルトか。ほぼデフォルト。忘れたけど、同じような配置になってます。っていう話をしていた。
Well, as you can see, at first glance, it's actually quite familiar. There are some things that are actually very similar here. There are a couple of things that are a bit different. Let's first focus on the similar here as to how it compares Unity to Unreal, and then we can look at what is slightly different within the UI here. So we have a menu set across the top, much like what Unity would have. We also have, of course, a scene view, or in this case, we simply refer to it as a viewport within Unreal Engine. We have a toolbar that we've put across the top of the viewport here, and this gives you access to basic settings here for the user interface within Unreal Engine, as well as some basic components like simple save button, but as well as more complex or in-depth things like overall project settings and things that affect the overall rendering settings on the project. But this toolbar exists essentially on top of the viewport within Unreal Engine. We mentioned in Unity there was an inspector.
はい。上の、カーソル出せないから。ちょっと待ってね。それじゃない。あれ。カーソル。出なかった。いいか。この上の方に見えてる、さっき、この辺ね。この辺に、基本的な設定項目、セーブとか、実行とか、まとまってるよってやつですね。で、押したら、ちょっと深いメニューが出て、で、もうちょい細かいのが、いっぱい出るよというやつです。
That affect the overall rendering settings on the project, but this toolbar exists essentially on top of the viewport within Unreal Engine. We mentioned in Unity there was an inspector. Well, what we have here is what we call a world outliner in Unreal Engine. And they work very differently here in the sense that there is
インスペクターの、ハイエラルキーが、ワールドアウトライナ
in the same placement by default in the default layout, but they actually are different than what we have in here. So in Unity, this would be pretty much what the hierarchy is. So back in Unity, we can see this hierarchy structure here.
ー。ああ、なるほどね。ユニティだと、ヒエラルキーはデフォで左にあるけど、アンリアルだと、さっきの右上にあるよと。いうアプローチですね。
And I have a camera and a light and a cube in here. And if I click on that, I'm seeing some of the details as they relate to in the inspector. The way this works in Unreal Engine is this world outliner is more like our hierarchy here, where if I select something in the viewport, just the same as in Unity, or I pick it in the actual world outliner here, I can get all of the details or parameters or anything that would be the same as what you're seeing in the inspector pane in Unity, I'm seeing here in the details panel in Unreal Engine here. So a little bit different by default. Of course, all of this is customizable. I can grab.
さっき Unity で選択したら詳細が出るインスペクターは、アンリアルだと、右下のディテールズに出るよと。配置が違うけど、並び替えられるよ。ということで、実践してくれるらしい。
And drag and pull that around and put it wherever I may want to have it there. But typically by default, the way we're working with it here is something like this, so that we have a world outliner and we have a details panel here. Whereas in Unity, this world outliner or inspector is on the top here, but this world outliner or hierarchy exists over here on the left. Now this is where it gets into something a little different here. You see that we have a pane or a panel here that doesn't exist in Unity, and that is this idea of modes. Now modes are
はい。で、左にある、このモーズっていうのは、Unity にないよねという話が始まります。
a way that we can edit levels or use level editors in Unreal Engine live within the viewport, essentially at any time while we're building. So you think of the modes as different building tools. So in here we have this essentially this placement mode. And in this placement mode, it allows us to do some things like, well, here we have some basic things like cubes or spheres or cylinders or whatever it may be that we want. Here's some basic lights, and you can simply grab and drag those into the viewport. Very much the same way that you would work with those lights in Unity or some basic 3D shapes for that matter. But our modes panel here, we have this placement tab, as I mentioned, with the placement of things like geometry or shapes or lights as an example. And we'll come back to some of these later. But we also have in here a paint mode. And this essentially allows you to do vertex painting, texture painting live within the viewport.
はい。この最初の1個目のタブにあるやつは、レベルにおける、なんかショートカットみたいなやつですね。ライトとか、キューブとか、そういうのそこからドラッグすれば使えるよっていうやつです。で、次のタブ、線の話します。
The placement of things like geometry or shapes or lights as an example. The placement of things like geometry or shapes or lights as an example. And we'll come back to some of these later. But we also have in here a paint mode. And this essentially allows you to do vertex painting, texture painting live within the viewport. We also have a landscape mode. Now in Unity there is a landscape mode as well, but all of these modes are always live within the viewport if you want them to be. You can simply click the X and remove that panel completely from here if you weren't in a building or a level editing state of this. And of course we have a foliage panel here where you can paint or apply trees or foliage throughout your scene. And then simply put, a geometry editing panel in here to do some basic editing on the geometry as you work within your scene. So by default, this is pretty much the way that...
はい。なんか急に説明がどんどん終わりましたね。ペイントは、ランドスケープって言って、背景のなんかでかい大陸的なやつとか山とか作るのに、それのなんかペイントして作れるみたいなやつです。隣の山も一緒に。だいたいそんな感じ。で、その隣の、なんか、花みたいなやつ。これは、草とか、花とか植えるやつです。でその一個隣は、メッシュを変形するのに、あったりするやつですね。なんか頂点とかを移動できるやつ。まあ、一番左のやつが、よく使うかな。それになったらくぐってください。
An Unreal Engine UI, it comes as default as the setup, and it is very similar in that sense to the Unity setup, except for this modes panel and that the world outliner is referred to as a hierarchy in Unity, and that would actually sit on this side. Over here, the details, or what would be Unity's inspector, sits right below this hierarchy or this world outliner here in Unreal Engine. So that's a real quick overview of those comparables. Now, really quickly, I want to show the next area here that's important to understand in the world of Unreal Engine. So there's the layout of those panes or those panels in Unreal Engine as to how they compare to Unity. But here's something that's different. Unreal Engine really works on this basis of editors. And to quickly show that, probably the easiest way to do that is to jump into something like maybe materials right now. And if I double click on one of the materials, let's take a look at maybe this rock marble polished here.
はい。今のは、標準的な、なんだろう、ビューなんだけど、をダブルクリックすると、別ウィンドウでね、開くところが、なんか重要だよって言ったので、ちゃんと見ていきましょう。
And if I double click on it, you can see that I get into a completely different editor. And we know it's completely different actually because we're seeing a very different UI than what we were working with. Well, if I minimize this, you can see that now that I actually have a floating different UI. This is a completely different UI than our main UI. And I can
完全に別のウィンドウが開きます。
grab this tab and I can just dock it right beside my main UI, so I can just switch back and forth. Well,
こんな風に一個のウィンドウにまとめることもできます。
what is this different UI? This is what we're talking about when you hear about Unreal Engine editors. We are right now in a material editor, and this UI, this editor, is specific to materials in Unreal Engine, as an example. And more on that later. We'll go into how the material editor works, but just back to what this world of editors is. As another example, I'll go into content, effects, we'll jump into something like particles in here, and maybe go into the butterflies. And what I'm going to do is I'll just double click on this butterfly flock stationary. And once again, we'll see that we have opened up a whole new editor. And this is the Unreal Engine Particle Editor. And in here, it's its own UI. It's its own floating dockable tab, if you will. But this is essentially the way Unreal Engine works. Everything has its own subset of controls and allows you to work within that framework as its own editor. And of course, you can customize or stack these as you want, or if you're finished with them, you simply just click on the X. You can always come back to those editors at any time to work with them. They are essentially their own UI to work with a very particular tool set. In this case here, as an example, we have a flock of butterflies that is simply being created here in Unreal Engine using the Unreal Engine particle system. So that's important to note here. There's the pane system.
はい。パーティクルだったらパーティクル、マテリアルだったらマテリアルの別々なエディタがあるので、わざわざ1個のウィンドウにしないで、タブとか、ウィンドウで切り替えて、編集するように、わざわざ、毎回別のタブなりウィンドウが開くようになってますみたいな。Unity だと、そのタブがないので、この辺は便利かなっていう感じですね。
That you're familiar with in Unity, but Unreal Engine also has on top of that this world of editors that float around, or you can dock, or however you want to work with them, that have a very specific tool set to whatever that area is that you're working with. And you'll see that Unreal Engine has a number of editors, and we're going to take a look at quite a few of them as we progress through our Unity to Unreal Engine comparables here.
思った。これで半分ぐらい来た？半分ぐらい来た。わあ。意外とあるな。アセットストアじゃん。これ見よう。ちょろい。見ちゃう。一人だと見ないんだよね。めんどくさくなる途中で。
When working with content in Unreal Engine, you may be familiar with some of the different ways to acquire content or assets in a Unity workflow. So here, for example, we have the asset store opened up on one of the tabs here, replacing the scene view here in Unity where we can access different content. I want to
タブあったね。なんか、これいけてないポイントだと思って、エディター上で一緒にくっついて、カセットストア開くの、強くないんじゃないかな。アンリアルの場合は、最初のね、ランチャーのところでお買い物できて、ランチャーから、プロジェクトに、入れるみたいな、ボタンがあるので、切り離した方がいいと思うんだよな。
go over how that works within the Unreal Engine world. Now, mentioned previously was that
先に行っちゃったね。
the Epic Game Launcher is a really robust environment on its own. It's a standalone application that allows you to access different versions or different builds of Unreal Engine, as well as manage or work with your projects and store things like different types of content. Well, let's take a look at how we can work with the Unreal Engine Marketplace, which is very much like the Unity Asset Store, to acquire different pieces of content. So the way we do this is a little bit different. If we are in Unreal Engine, we actually flip over here to the Epic Games Launcher here to be able to access our Marketplace, which is this little tab here. And if I just click on Marketplace, it's going to load that up. And this is going to give us a searchable database, if you will, of all different types of content. Much like if you're familiar with Unity's Asset Store, you'll find this very easy to use here. We have a simple search bar up here that we can search, or of course you can go and be able to look through all different types of content, from things like characters to code plugins to sound effects, or maybe different textures or props, whatever it may be. All sorts of different categories and assets that you can work with. And of course, some of the basics here, if you want to just look at immediately free content or content that might happen to be on sale. Of course, you can see that we have content that is featured here on the front page, all different types of content to work with here. So very easy way to work with content in here. I'm just going to click on the free one here. You'll notice that sometimes I'm actually using this Epic Zen Garden, which I have open as my project right here. And that is simply acquired from the marketplace here. It's the exact same thing I'm using here. You can click on any of these objects in here and then just simply click download. In this case, I have it downloaded, but you can create a project from that, or you can even bring these components, if you have different objects or meshes or textures or materials or whatever it may be, you can have those added to whatever project it is that you're working with there. So that's just a really quick overview there. If you're familiar with Unity's Asset Store, in the Unreal Engine world, we work with the Unreal Engine Marketplace, which you can access through the Epic Games launcher.
ああ、終わっちゃった。要するにですね、一個飛ばしてた。アセットストアで買えるよと。ユニティと大体一緒だよみたいな。一個違うのは、ランチャーから買ったりできるよっていうところですね。はい。
Importing assets into Unity and Unreal Engine have a lot in common, actually. So we're going to see here that it's a very similar process, or some of the basic rules when it comes to a game engine project directory structure like Unity adheres to and Unreal Engine adheres to. Some of those basic rules apply whether you're within the Unity environment or Unreal Engine environment. So you should be able to see quite a very easy or comfortable area of familiarity when it comes to importing assets into Unreal Engine. So a couple of things we'll take a look at here. In the Unity viewport, let's start with this. If we simply right-click on there, we have an import new asset in there, and we can simply just import an asset into wherever we're working in, or whatever project or whatever directory we're working in there. Let's jump over to Unreal Engine and take a look at how that would work here as well. So, for example, I do happen to have a couple of little sample props here. Now, if I wanted to import some of these props in here, there's a number of ways that we can do this very quickly and very easily into Unreal Engine. So let's take a quick look at how those compare to coming over from the world of Unity. So if I have some props or some textures, for example, that I want to bring over into Unreal Engine, I wanted to show you a couple of simple things here. So if I have some meshes that I want to bring over, it's always a really good idea to keep your project organized. So I might have some props or something that I want to bring over. I'm going to go into the props structure here, directory here, and you can see that there's a rock in here. That's fine. I might want to put something like, maybe it's just this art model that's going to come in here. Well, I have a couple of different ways that I could bring that in. I could do the exact same thing that we saw in Unity there. I could simply right-click and go to Import to Game, and or Props for that matter, and that'll allow me to import that asset the exact same way. Or what I can also do is I can rather quickly just simply left-click and drag and drop the asset into the scene. And what it's going to do is it's going to prompt me with a couple of different options here for how I want to import that file. Now that's an FBX object that I'm bringing in. What we can do here is simply, of course, set or select anything on here, and I can go ahead and hit import. Now in doing so, it's going to bring that object right into my scene here. Now, one thing to note, whenever anything's imported in, regardless of the method that we use here to import an asset, you will see anything brand new to the scene will have a little star, a little asterisk in the corner. And that's simply because it hasn't been saved in the scene. Now, to get rid of that asterisk there, or
はい。インポートの話ですね。で、右クリックからインポートしてもいいし、エディターに直接ドラッグ&ドロップしてもいいよという感じですね。で、インポートすると、アスタリスクのマークがついて、これセーブされてないよって意味ですね、と。で、それの話か。
or that reminder, which is what that is, we can just simply go save all, and you can just say save selected, and you can see the asterisk is gone now. What's happened behind the scenes that it's actually created that .u asset format for us, so that is now in the Unreal Engine project directory structure there as a .u asset now for that art that we've just brought in there. Let's take a look at a couple of simple ways that we can do that. We looked at how we can right click and we can click on import to game props. Exact same thing. We could just go through the Windows directory to wherever our prop or texture, whatever it may be that we want to bring in exists, and just simply click that. Likewise, there's also an import button, and that's going to do the exact same thing. That's going to allow us to click import, grab a Windows directory, find our prop or texture, whatever it may be, and bring that in as well. One other thing to note, let's go back to our little structure that we have here, a little.
はい。なんかだんだん眠くなってきたんだけど、ですね、インポートオール、違う、インポートか。インポートボタンがあるので、こっからもインポートできるよと。一個注意してほしいのが、コンテントブラウザ。今下で開いてるフォルダのとこね。フォルダ階層のとこに対してインポートされるので、余計な場所でインポートしないように、あらかじめフォルダを作って、そこに入って、で、インポートするって感じかな。眠くなってきたのは、多分思ってたより知ってることばっかりだったので、その時にはちょっと飽きてきたというところがあり、そのせいですね。なので健康的には大丈夫。はい、続きを見ます。
Directory of props. You can see that I have some OBJs in here. So let's take a look at, for example, these books here. They're books.obj. Well, Unreal Engine will treat the OBJ on import pretty much like an FBX import. So if I just do the exact same thing, drag and drop it into here, you'll see that I'll actually get an FBX import options. It wants to know the basic things that I want to do here. If I want to set a translation or rotation or adjust its scale or whatever it may be, and then I can go ahead, of course, and click import. This is important to note. Unreal Engine will always do a check, kind of this idea of a map check, we'll call it, over anything that comes into Unreal. So whether it's a texture or an object, it's always going to run a little check on it and make sure that everything is friendly in here. Here it's pointing out that there is no smoothing group information that is found on that object. So if that's an issue, if you wanted a smoothing group, you needed a particular smoothing group, it's warning you on there, giving you that, heads up that this doesn't have a specific smoothing group on there. Otherwise, I can just go clear and work away with it if I know that the object.
はい。ここが結構いけてるポイントですね。これ、インポートするときに、だいたい、どうやってインポートしますかみたいなやつをですね、聞いてくれるウィンドウが出るんですよ。すると、インポート前に、軸がずれてるから、 回転させたり、モデルだと、マテリアルとテクスチャは、とりあえずいらないからチェック外すみたいな。そういうね、インポート設定ができるし、間違った時にですね、キャンセルできるんですよ。すごい普通のこと言ってるけど、ユニティで普通にね、ドラッグ&ドロップで入れると、何も言わさず、モードが走るわけですよ。これでさ、間違ったファイル20ギガぐらいさ、ロードしたときどうなんのマジで。何もできなくなんじゃん。というところで、ここは超親切ポイントです。はい。で、この辺は、インポートしたときにですね、ネットのチェックをしてるよと。今回は、FBX をインポートしたときに、スムースグループスムージンググループの設定がされてないよっていう、エラーが出てるんですけど、そこまで大きな影響はないかもしれない。申すことには越したことはないけど、とりあえず見る分には入ったので、よしとしましょうという感じですね。
It's a particular smoothing group. It's warning you on there, giving you that, heads up that this doesn't have a specific smoothing group on there. Otherwise, I can just go clear and work away with it if I know that the object is the way that I want to work with it. So that's the basics of importing an object into there so that we can bring that in as a model or a 3D asset. Let's take a look at some textures here. So I'm just going to go to the content directory. I'll go into some textures in here. And let's just go back to our drag and drop that we were working with here. Now we have some different cushion fabrics in here, and here's a nice deer skin as well. Let's just grab that color deer skin map and just drag and drop it over here. You're going to see it's just going to go through an import process and simply bring it in. So nothing special has happened there. It's just brought in that color map. Let's take the normal map of this deer skin here, and we'll just simply left mouse click and drag it into Unreal here. You'll see that down below it's going to tell us that it was imported as a normal map. And that's important. That's Unreal Engine recognizing that that is a normal map, and it's going to give you the heads up and tell you that it has brought that in. It's recognized it's a normal map, and it's brought it in. Much the way that Unity will do that as well. It will give you a warning or a heads up that it has found that that texture is a normal map, and it is treating it as such. So same idea here within Unreal Engine. So those are the basics there as to
はい。普通のテクスチャーは、ポンと入れると、特にすることもないので、キュッと入るんだけど、ノーマルマップ、あれ、モデルの表面とかを、ボコボコさせるやつ。させる用のテクスチャーがあるんだけど、これをインポートしたときにね、こいつをノーマルマップとしてインポートしたよと。そういうオプションが出るわけです。ちゃんと見てるぞと。いうところですね。はい。
Unreal Engine. So those are the basics there as to how we work with assets coming in. In this case here, we're just looking at simple 3D objects and textures. Audio, anything else that we want to work with is in the exact same way. We can drag and drop, or we can right-click, click import, and surf to the directory in our Windows directory, or even hit that import button. Now, one last thing I wanted to point out. If we're working within our specific directory here, Here, for example, is the Epic Zen Garden content, and I'm in here in the textures. Let's just go into one of these textures here, and let's take, for example, this cushion.png. Well, if I take that and I work with it outside of Unreal Engine, and that is in the Windows directory here, I can do that. And that's the same way that you would work with that in Unity, whether it's a drag and drop like this or a copy and paste, or saving it right from its source. Maybe it's right from Photoshop or Maya or 3ds Max. We can do that. We can save it right to the project directory. So I'm just going to copy this here, and I'm going to paste it into this, and we'll see that that cushion PNG is pasted in there. And in Unreal Engine, we're going to see a heads up here that content has changed. It's detected that content has changed. Do I want to import it into the scene? You'll get this heads up warning anytime content has changed within the project directory structure, regardless of what it is. A texture, a 3D object, some animation, audio, whatever it may be. And this is a good thing. This means that if I'm working live within something like 3ds Max or Maya or any other 3D software package, and I'm saving directly to the Unreal Engine content folder, to that project directory structure, it's going to give me this here. And I can say, of course, import or don't import for whatever reason there. And I can also say don't ask again, so that it will just do that automatically for me. So here I'm going to hit import on there, and you can see that it's processing the source file changes, and of course it's brought that cushion into our directory there so that we now have it inside the structure. So just to point out what's happened here now, you can see that it's actually created that cushion1.u asset.
はい。ここまで一旦簡単に説明すると、Unity みたいに、フォルダに直接ね、エクスプローラーとかで、ドンと入れても、インポートできるよと。そうすると、エディター側で、ファイルなんか増えてるけど、インポートするみたいなやつを聞いてくれるので、インポートするか、インポートしないか、もう聞くな、みたいなオプションが、右下に出てるのね。で、ここから選べるよ、という話をしてました。はい。ちょっと、もうちょい。はい。そうすると、ピングで入れたけど、ノットユーアセット形式のデータができたよと。から話が戻ります。
New asset. As I mentioned before, that's how Unreal Engine works with its assets behind the scene in its project directory structure. So now that we've imported in the scene, it's part of the project, it's gone ahead and converted that. You'll note, though, the way that we imported this differently here by going through Windows rather than Unreal, there's no star or asterisk there because it's already taken care of the saving process, creating that .u asset. We don't have that on these here. It's warning us that it wants us to save that. So that's that deerskin2_n and deerskin_c for a normal map and a color map. Now, if we hit save all on this, I'm going to say save selected on those, and then go back to that structure there. We will now see those two in there. The asterisks are gone from the two, and we see that it's created a U asset. So now it's fully part of the project. It's saved in, and we can work with it in any way we want. Anytime we open this project, those assets will be there ready to go. So that's a quick overview of how we import assets into Unreal Engine via the right-click import through Windows, or using the import button here, or simply dragging and dropping the asset, or going directly through Windows by copying it or saving it directly into the Unreal Engine directory structure. Things that you'd be very familiar with coming over from a Unity environment into Unreal Engine.
はいはい。という感じで、 インポートの話が終わりました。大体、オブジェクトにインポートすると、ドットインアセット形式にコンバートされるので、そこだけかな。ファイル変わってるみたいなとこがあるんだけど、大丈夫です。はい。
One of the biggest differences that we will see coming over from Unity to Unreal Engine is some of the naming conventions, or some of the naming of some of the things, the way that we refer to different objects or things or parameters that we may work with here in Unreal Engine as compared to the way it may work in Unity. So one of the things I want to take a look at here that's important to distinguish is game objects. And in the Unreal Engine world, we refer to those as actors. So you may be familiar with here in Unity the game object idea of creating something like an empty object, or perhaps you create a 3D object like a cube or a sphere or a cylinder, whatever it may be, and you simply place that into your scene. In Unreal Engine, we actually work with this in a very similar way, but the difference is that we call them actors. So on our modes panel with placement by default selected here, you can see underneath basic here, or we could go under any number of different ones here. You can go into any area here. I'm just going to go under basic. We have what we refer to as actors. So we saw in Unity the idea of creating a game object, or for that matter, maybe something like an empty game object. We would create something like an empty actor and place it into our scene. Or if we wanted to create a 3D game object equivalent of Unity, we would simply be creating a cube actor in here, or a sphere actor, or a cylinder, or very much the same idea, the primitive objects that existed over there. So as an example, if I wanted to just take something like a cube, I could just left click and drag that and simply bring that into my scene, and of course then just place it to wherever it is that I may want that to be within the scene. And we'll see over here in the world outliner, it is simply just called cube. And we know that it is just simply a static mesh actor is what that is referred to as. Now this idea of a game object and an actor are very much the same thing in the way that it is an object that we can do many things with. We can add different attributes or parameters or components to be able to work with. So on that, just to expand a little bit on this, where Unreal Engine's a little bit different.
はい。ここまで簡単にまとめると、Unity のゲームオブジェクトと、アクターは、UE4 のアクターね。大体一緒なんだけど、この後ちょっと違うよという話が出てくるっぽい。で、Unity のカラーゲームオブジェクトは、UE4 のエンプティアクターとかに該当して、他にもキューブ、スフィア、シリンダー、このあたりは、同じように作れるよ。けど全部、アクターって呼ぶよと。
Is that we do have, as you can see, empty actors, much like the idea of empty game objects, and of course 3D objects and things like that that we can place in the scene as actors. But you'll see that we have things like empty pawns or empty characters. Now these are different in the way that an empty pawn is like the idea of creating an empty player, something that is going to have artificial intelligence to it, or something with a little more control ability to it. Much like creating something like an empty character, where we might want to have a creature or something that we want to add to the scene, or be able to add to that empty character that we add into there. So rather than just an empty or several 3D objects, we actually have the ability to break it down further into things like that empty pawn, to have as your base class in there, so that you can work with that as a place to start with building a player type of mentality into your level, your environment, or your project. So that's a quick overview of the compare.
はい。ちょっと違うのが、エンティコントローラーとか、エンティポーンなどがあって、カラーのキャラクター用のカラーのやつとか、ポーンとかあるんだけど、あんまり、この、アクターとか、キャラクターとかポーン作るのは、あんまり見たことないかな。ブループリントから、クラス選んで、キャラクターにするか、アクターかポーンか、選べるので、こっちでいいような気もする。はい。
Comparison between Unity's game objects and Unreal Engine's actors.
終わっちゃった。よいしょ。頑張って。途中で止めてるからやっぱ時間がね、2時間じゃ終わんない。
When looking at how Unreal Engine handles actors versus Unity's game objects, it's important to look at the next level of what we refer to as actors or game objects there in Unity and as to what we can do with those actors. Well, in Unity, there is a thing called components, which, here in this example here, I have a simple cube that I've added a couple of components. There's a light and a simple particle system coming out of there, and they are components of this cube. Well, in Unreal Engine, we work in very much a similar way in here, in that we can do the exact same thing. So I could simply drop down, a cube or a sphere, or for that matter, I might want to just drop down an empty actor and just place it within my scene here. And you can see that it's placed in the world outliner, just an actor. And this would be like an empty game object in the Unity world. Well, the interesting thing about the way that we work with this is much like the way we work in Unity with having a game object and you add components in the inspector, you can see in our details panel a big green button right on the top left on any actor is always going to be this add component button. So I'm just simply going to click on add component, and perhaps maybe what I want to do is actually add a piece of geometry in this case. So I'm going to add a sphere in this case, and I'll move that sphere up a little bit there. And let's just take a look at what we have here. So this is our component structure that we're working with in here now. So now what I want to be able to do here, there's the actor, which actually controls everything here. So I've got that down at the root, and I've moved the sphere above the actor root in there. Well, then what I can actually do as well is I can continue just to add in infinite number of components in here. So if you're familiar with the idea of adding components to a game object in Unity, this is quite a very familiar type of setup here. Of course, there's the same idea of searching for different components in there as well. So in this case here, let's go in and add maybe something like a point light. I can name that point light to whatever I want it to be. I'm going to take this point light and maybe move it right up top here to give it a little bit of a glow or something on there if I wanted to do that. And of course, maybe my light color, let's just change that to something like a bit of an orange.
はい。Unity みたいにアドコンポーネントできるよという話ですね。大したことはない。
And then let's add in a simple component here. I'm going to add in a simple little particle system in here. And in here, I have the ability to do whatever I want to with that particle system if I wanted to create this into whatever it may be. Of course, I could also go in here and use some existing particle systems that I have in my scene in here, or I could import in a specific one in there as well. So here I'm just going to put maybe a bit of the little bird flocks in here that I could put as positioned onto that actor, that empty actor, which is now a sphere with a light attached. And of course, I can position that particle system wherever I want it to be. Maybe my light, if I want to position that up to be a little bit higher on there for whatever reason. And then, of course, grabbing the actor is what controls the entire object as it stands in the scene. And you can see that it places that as an actor and
まああれですね。階層になってるので、こう動かしても、親を動かないよと。で、親を動かせば、ここも一緒についてくるよと。そういうあれですね。
and in the scene. But of course, this is something that if I'm creating a structure out of, I may want to rename that or create it into something that I can remember what it is or I'm working with here. So I've created simply a little sphere with a light that I can simply place around the scene. And I can continue to add, an infinite number of components to be able to work with here. And it's important to know that each component has its own individual controls under there that I can access. So if you're familiar with Unity's game object and component structure, very much similar here over in Unreal Engine, with the ability to go in and add infinite components to create just about anything here with actors in Unreal Engine.
なんかすげえ雑に締められたコンポーネントいっぱいあるよって。まあそうなんだけど。はい。
In the world of Unity, quite often developers will work with things like prefabs, which is a packaged up piece of content that they can use and repeat throughout the scene. So if you're familiar with that in Unity, quite often you can create your own prefabs up here, for example, under the assets menu, or there's a couple different ways to be able to build or customize a prefab, which is essentially a packaged up set of objects and components that can be replicated or reused as their own individuals throughout a project. Well, let's take a look at how we handle that in Unreal Engine. We have a very similar way of working with that. That is actually a very powerful and very large.
おー、ごめん。はい、出ました。1万ポイント。ユニティのプレハブあるじゃないですか。アンリアルにも、ベリーシミラーなワーキングがあるんですけど、
with that is actually a
それは、very powerful だよと、自慢してきました。ここ面白いところですね。
a very powerful and very large
そして、very large
network of visual scripting, and we refer to those as blueprints in Unreal Engine. But let's take a look at this direct comparison here of the Unity prefab to an Unreal Engine equivalent. And the way that we work with that is with these things that we refer to as blueprints. Now, in the previous example, I created this really simple little structure here of a sphere with a light, and we put a little flock of birds working throughout the scene there, and we ended up with something that can move around and be its own little structure or whatever it may be there. Well, how would we replicate this or be able to work with this as separate, the way prefabs might work in Unity? Well, it's actually very easy here in Unreal Engine. So in an example like this, where I've created something here with a couple of different objects and I've layered on some components here, a light and a simple particle system of those birds that are traveling away from or out of that sphere, I could simply now package this up into something that's a little more portable here that I can reuse and repurpose in my scene. So we simply come up here beside the Add Component button. You'll see that we have this Blueprint Add Script button. It's blue, and you'll find this on any actor throughout Unreal Engine. Anything at all that is an actor, you'll be able to find that blue button on there. So I'll simply just click that. And it's asking me to define where I want to store that object. Well, in the Unreal Engine directory structure for that matter, how we work with project structure, it's a good idea to keep everything organized. So in this case, because I'm creating a blueprint, I'm actually going to place it in a blueprint folder, which I happen to have right here within this project set up. So I would want to give it a name. In this case, I'll just leave it as Actor Blueprint. It is actually a good idea to start by putting BP for blueprints in front of anything on here. I should have a better name than Actor for this little thing that I've created there, but we'll just call it BP. That in that way, in Unreal Engine world, we know that that is a blueprint that we've created. So I'll click.
はい。ですね。さっき追加した、アクターあるじゃないですか。これにブループリントを追加できる。ブループリント化できるボタンがさっきの青いやつで、あんまりもう使った覚えがないけど、まあ、ブループリントにして保存できるよと。で、その時に、名前ですね。命名規則があって、ブループリントの時は、ファイル名の前に bp アンダースコアをつけてあげると良いです。という話をしていました。
In that way, in Unreal Engine world, we know that that is a blueprint that we've created. So I'll click Create Blueprint, and it's simply going to create that, and it's going to open up the editor for me if I want to be able to go in and edit that. I'm just actually going to get out of there. But here is our new little actor. And if you remember, the asterisk is there because we have not saved that content to the disk, to the project here. But the nice thing about this now is this is now its own little separate packaged up piece, much like a prefab would work. So to illustrate how that would work, I'll just left click and drag and bring that into the scene here. And you can see that there's our original and here's our other packaged up blueprint on there that I can place or repurpose anywhere throughout the scene. And I can do this repeatedly here throughout the scene. And this is a very simple example, right? We have an empty.
はい。で、ブループリントにして、コンテンツブラウザに入っちゃえば、ドラッグ&ドロップで、複製というかシーンに、レベルに置けるよという話ですね。
Empty actor that has a simple sphere object in there. There's a simple particle system, a simple light. This is a simple example. We could build a very complex structure in here and be able to repurpose this through the scene. So if you're familiar with Unity's prefabs, this is the way we work with the equivalent of that within Unreal Engine, is this ability to very quickly create a blueprint which works as this packaged up preset package of actors and different meshes and different components in there that we can reuse or repurpose throughout our project.
この今、
equivalent of that within Unreal Engine is this ability to very quickly create a blueprint which works as this packaged up preset package of actors and different meshes and different components in there that we can reuse or repurpose throughout our project.
はい。要するに、プレハブみたいなのが、ブループリントなんだけど、複雑になったり、いろいろなんかね、入り乱れても、プレハブよりはいいぞと、いう感じですね。はい。ライティングになった。
When we create a project in Unreal Engine, or in any other game engine for that matter, lighting plays an important role in here. Well, in here, we're not going to take a look at a course or a tutorial on proper lighting techniques, but let's take a look at an overview of a comparison from how, if you're familiar with lighting in Unity, as to how we work with it in Unreal Engine. So very quickly, let's just jump back over to Unity here, and we can see that if you're familiar with how Unity works with its lighting, you would typically go and create a light up here, and you can see in this menu here, directional, point, spotlight, and an area light is what they work with here in Unity. So simply put, dropping down a light into Unity allows you to go ahead and place that. And then over in the inspector is all of the important parameters or attributes to be able to set how that light's going to work. Everything from its intensity to its color and its placement within the scene. So let's jump over to Unreal Engine and take a look at that in that exact same comparison there of a directional light within a scene. So you can see up here on our modes panel, by default it's in the place or the placement mode. We can go down to our light setting, and you'll see that we have a very similar set of options for lighting here, with the exception of an area light on there, but we can build essentially the way an area light will work very simply out of customizing any of these lights here to be able to do what we want to do. But you can see we have a directional, a point, a spot, and we have a skylight in there. So those are the 4 default lights that Unreal Engine will work with right from the start. So let's
はい。ライトがいけるよという話で、ユニティには、ディレクショナルポイント、スポット、エリアライト、4つがあるんだけど、リアルだと、エリアライトではなくて、スカイライトがあるよという話です。が、エリアライトも最近追加されたので、まあ、そういうとこだぞ。
Let's take a look at that exact same example here as to how that would work within Unreal Engine from Unity here. So we're in the placement, I've hit lights. I'm going to just left click and drag into the scene a directional light. And you can see that it's placed that light in there, and it's actually very bright right now. If we don't see anything related to the actual selection of the light in the scene, you can simply hit G. And what G does as a hotkey is it brings up all of the different little gizmos within the scene so that we can see this light that we're working with here. So
この G のショートカットキー、結構大事なので、覚えておくと良いですね。なんでかっていうと、不意に間違って押しちゃったときに、あれこれクリックしたのに、どうやって動かすんだ？矢印出てこないぞってなるので、G キー、その表示、非表示の切り替えができるので、覚えておきましょう。
So I have this light. It's showing me the direction here, which is this white arrow that we're working with. So just to show how that works, if I press E to rotate that around, you can see that E is simply going to rotate around, and we can see the shadows and everything affecting that environment from that light. Now, into the detail panel, I'm just going to bring this up a little bit here. We can see that we have very familiar different settings in here. So in here we have things like an intensity level. We can certainly bring that down if it's a little too intense. And of course we have a light color. Now we can expand that and be able to dial in specifically the numeric values of the R, G, and B setting, or we can simply click on the light color to bring up a color picker here to be able to dial in the specific type of color if we wanted to add a little bit of mood to that this atmosphere, this environment in this project here. So I've got a bit of an orangey red light. I'll just hit OK. And I can go in and be able to work with how that light is going to work within the scene. Now we can see things like light source angle, the temperature that we can turn on and work with if we wanted to. There's a whole bunch of different settings here specific to how that light is going to work.
今、割とさらっと流されたんだけど、光の色味を色温度で設定できる Temperature っていうオプションが、ちょっと前に追加されたので、建築系の人とかは、色温度で合わせたりするっぽいので、便利になりました。
So there's a directional light. While we're here, why don't we take a quick look at how that might work with a different light, like a spotlight? If you are familiar with lighting, you'll know that a directional light isn't influenced or affected by translating like I'm doing here. It's only by rotation, of course, which is the direction of the light as it's projecting downward. So let's grab a simple point light.
ディレクショナルライトは、方向しか持ってないので、移動しても、意味ないよと。回転だけ見てるよと。ユニティも同じです。
And if we drag that into the scene, you can see that a point light here in Unreal Engine is pretty much what you would expect it to be if you're familiar with the way a point light works in Unity. The icon is a little different. It's more of a light bulb, but you can see that we get the exact same effect, or what we would expect here. The difference being that we see this sphere here that represents the overall radius or effect of that light. And of course, we have an intensity settings in here that I can adjust. Same thing, the color setting. The parameters are set in Unreal Engine to be exactly the same per light so that you're familiar with them regardless of what you're working with here. You will see a couple of different attributes or parameters set in here depending on what it is that we're trying to do here. So we can see that some of the naming may be different, but overall the idea of the way that we set the color, the intensity, and the overall fall off or affecting area of the radius of the lighting is very easy to be able to dial in the parameters that exist in the details panel for the light in there as well. Lastly, let's take a quick look at the spotlight in here. And if you're familiar with the spotlight in Unity, you'll certainly be comfortable with the way that a spotlight works here in Unreal Engine. The difference may be, again, some of the naming within Unreal Engine here. I'm just going to turn the intensity up, maybe make the light color something like maybe a green. And we can see that we have, if you're familiar with the way a spotlight works with the inner cone angle versus the outer cone, we have the ability to dial that in here as well to allow how sharp of a fall off or soft of a fall off that we have on that overall effect on that spotlight in there. So very much a familiar setting if you're used to Unity's placement and dialing in of the attributes on lights. Here in Unreal Engine, we use our modes, lights, we place them in the scene, and underneath our details panel, we're able to grab all of the different attributes required to be able to set our lighting for our scene here in our Unreal project.
まあ、ユニティと大体ライトの設定一緒だよねという話でした。まあ、パラメーターの名前がちょっと違うぐらいだよと。はい。なんか意外と普通。
When looking at a project, we've looked at some of the lighting setup. It's important that we look at how materials work within Unreal Engine and how that compares to if you're familiar with the setup within Unity. So let's take a quick look at the comparison between the way we would create a material or a shader from Unity as to how that would work in Unreal Engine. So I'm just going to hop over to Unity here, and we'll see that I've just simply created a new material, which is the same idea in Unreal that we would have, which is, a right click, for example, selecting create and going to material. Of course, you can also go in and create this from right up here underneath the Assets menu where we can go to Create Material, which is the same menu that we're accessing on right click. And we
さ、今更なんだけどさ、ユニティ上さ、何にも設定入れてあげないのさ、さすがにかわいそうだよ。いや、まあ、はい。
We have the very similar way of doing this in Unreal Engine. Let's click on that material here. So this simple shader here, in Unity, they refer to this as a material or a shader here that we have. You can see albedo for the color as a main map, and then metallic, which works very similar to the way Unreal Engine has in there as well. We work with metallic to be able to dial in and work with layers of things like specularity or gloss or different things like that. And of course, normal maps, height maps, occlusion, how the material or the textures applied may be tiled. There's an emission function to be able to give, some brightness or some offset of glow upon there. We can see that everything is essentially attached or worked with here within the inspector for the most part on this shader and material ball here. Let's go over to Unreal Engine and take a look at how that works here. So I'm just going to jump into the materials folder that already exists in the project here and do the same thing. I'm going to create a basic new material. Same idea. I can go to right click, and underneath here you can see there is a create basic asset. So I'll just click material. Down below there's also a materials and textures area that goes a little more advanced as to what is available. That's the same selection material there. There's a couple other different types of functions and instances that we can create, but I'll just create a basic material. I'll leave it called new material, same as we were working with there in Unreal or over in Unity there as well. We just had it called new material. So let's go back to basic over here. And maybe what I should do in this case is put down something like a simple cube, much like we were working with over there in Unity. And then I'll just kind of frame that in a bit. And let's apply that material. So right now I have this new material. There's nothing going on it, but I'm just going to left click and drag onto the cube. And I can see that my new material is actually empty. There's nothing happening on it. This is because materials here in Unreal Engine work a little bit differently. Now, if I click on that or double click on that, you'll see.
はい。ユニティだと、なんか適当なシェーダーがあって、もう何個か、適当にパラメータをいじるだけで、ちょっとね、見えるんだけど、アンリアルだと、今開いたエディターみたいに、空っぽなので、ちょっとね、ここが違うよという話です。
See that it opens up a material editor. And this is where we get into quite a bit of a robust environment here that allows us to, of course, preview what our material is going to look like. Here's a details panel, much the same as it would operate in the regular UI, which is over here on the left. We're just working with a tab of this material editor here that we've created this new material. But really, at the end of the day, these channels or these connections are or should be quite familiar to you in Unity. Of course, some of the naming is a bit different, but instead of the albedo, we have a base color. There's our metallic. We have an additional specular and roughness. There's an emissive color, much like we've seen over there in the Unity shader. A normal map, and things like occlusion or ambient occlusion for that matter, that we can work with. So in here, we have a rather large selection of different things that we can work with in here. You can see there's all sorts of different functions and different things that you can work with to be able to achieve whatever it is you may want to achieve. So if we wanted to put a texture in there, easy enough to drag and drop a texture in there. Maybe I just want to have a constant color in there. So in this case, I can just drag and drop. Everything's by this connection node here, this idea of connecting things very easily to be able to dial in or connect to wherever you want it to be. Now I'm just using a simple constant value here, so I'm essentially using math to drive the color of this, and it's just a 0 to 1. 0 being black, 1 being white, and I'm just dialing in something here in between here to be able to give a little bit of a base color.
はい。ベースカラーに、とりあえず定数を指してみようと。ベースカラーはユニティでいう、アルベドかなって感じなので、今、点数を入れて、左上のビューで、チェックしてるって感じですね。なんで白と黒になるかっていうと、勝手に数字1個だけつなぐと、RGB それぞれに同じ数字が入るので、白黒で表現されます。
Now, of course, I could go in and I could apply textures and all different things in here, much the same way that you would work in Unity. The difference here is that we have this node-based system to be able to connect it up. Something like if you're familiar with 3ds Max or Maya, same idea as to the way that you would create materials in here. Now, without going too in-depth to that, because the point of this is to be a comparison to if you're coming from the Unity world over into Unreal Engine, we have a simple little sample here, and this is a rock sample from one of the rocks in the Zen garden scene. And you can see how complex it can get here. But really, at the end of the day, this is just a number of textures and a bunch of different functions that are happening in here to be able to produce a material within the scene. And at that point, anything that we do with that material that we create, I could just go simply apply, save that material, and we see that it updates in the scene in there. Of course, with that, I'm not stuck to that material. I can drag and drop or apply any other materials that I may want to work with there as well. But the basics here as to the way that it is laid out in Unity, it's a little bit different in the way that we work with a rather robust material editor that allows you to have access to several different functions if you want. You don't have to at all. You can simply dial in a color or place a texture and rope them in or dial them in and connect them to whatever channels they need to be connected to. The main thing is this new material node, or this node here that is called new material, as I just named it new material or left it called new material. These are the similar channels or connections that you'd be working with there over in Unity. And it doesn't take very long to get in there and be able to start to drop in some nodes and be able to create very powerful materials very quickly within Unreal Engine.
はい。まあ、割とロバストな作りなので、最初始めるには、ちょっとね、ハードルがあるかもしんないけど、どういった。これは、公式サンプルは、割と複雑なマテリアルになりがちなので、これはあんまりね、後で参考にしてください。これをいきなり見ると、どうやってできるんじゃーってビビると思うので、とりあえず最初はね、数値か、色か、テクスチャドーンでいいと思います。必要なとこだけね、順々に覚えてって、で、難しいのが気になってきたらこの辺をね、どうなってんだって、のが良いと思います。そしてこれもうちょっと、整理してほしい。はい、そんな感じです。だいぶ来た。まだあんのいっぱいあんな。もう2時間経ったよ。いやー。多いな 飽きてきたので、もう一個見て、次という感じで良いですか？なんかね、飽きちゃうよね。長いし。
If you're familiar with how to apply materials or work with materials over in Unity, you'll find that it's very similar over here in Unreal Engine. So over in Unity, you are probably used to the idea of, applying materials in a couple of ways. One of them is probably the most simple way, which is the drag and drop way. Well, of course, we can do that over here in Unreal Engine. I think it's worthwhile to do a really quick comparison of the different ways that materials can be applied here in Unreal Engine. So here we have this really simple cube that I've created in the scene. And what I want to be able to do is just work with a couple of different materials in a couple of different ways. So here we have a very simple polished material applied to this cube. I have here a couple of different rock materials. So there are a couple of different ways that we can apply them. So if I wanted something like this rock path material, I could just left click on that and of course drag and drop that directly onto the cube just by releasing the left mouse button over top of the object there, and it's applied that. Now if I click on the cube, it's going to show us materials, and that element 0 is that M for material underscore rock path. So we've applied it to that. Now there's a different way that we can also apply materials here in Unreal Engine as well. That's worthwhile being familiar with here. So if I wanted, say, for example, this other rock material here, I have the cube selected, but down in the content browser, I have this other material selected. So I can simply go to this arrow, and I can use the selected asset from the content browser to be applied to the object in the scene. So if I click that, it'll just simply apply that for me over there. Now another interesting way to apply materials or to
なんか、すげえボケーと聞いてたけど、結構重要ポイントでしたね。マテリアルを適用するのに、コンテントブラウザからドラッグ&ドロップで設定できるんだけど、この右のね、ディテールズのマテリアルの絵が出てる矢印のボタンあるじゃないですか。で、ここをですね、押すと、コンテントブラウザで選択肢のアセットを適用してくれるっていう神機能があるんですよ。なので、これ超便利だから、覚えてください。ちなみに、右の、一個右の、矢印のね、一個右の、虫眼鏡のマークを押すと、そこから検索できます。神という機能があります。
into the scene is to be able to very quickly find out what material is applied to an object if I want to try out that material on another object or apply it to a different object. An example would be, for example, this floor right here. I can see that by clicking on the floor, we have a number of material elements here. For that matter, there's 3 materials applied as to different pieces of this floor here. So we can see that we have this different type of wood walnut and different type of wood floor that's happening here on this object. Well, if I wanted, for example, that wood floor pattern on here, what I can do is I can simply find where that material exists. I can click the little magnifying glass and it'll just simply take me right to that exact material. And then from there, of course, I have the option to just simply left mouse, drag and drop onto there. Now it's interesting to note that we did this in almost the opposite way of the way that we worked by using that method of selecting a material.
ですね、ちょっと盛り上がって、ね、失敗したんですが、さっきの、 虫眼鏡ボタンあるじゃないですか。あれを押すと、コンテントブラウザ側で選択してくれるんですよ。なので、今みたいに、そこの床のマテリアル、他にも使いたいんだけど、どこにあんのみたいな、いう風になった時に、床を選択して、虫眼鏡を押して、コンテントブラウザで選択された状態になるから、次にキューブをクリックして、矢印ボタンを押すと、が提供されるわけですよ。
In the content browser while having an object selected and then pressing the arrow. The difference here is that we're not selecting that object at all. Our floor object is still selected while we're working with applying the material to a totally different object. So there are a couple different ways that you can work with materials here or apply materials in Unreal Engine as compared to Unity when you're working with your Unreal Engine projects.
いい話だったので、もう一個行こう。
If you're familiar with using post-process volumes or post-processing stack in Unity, I think you'll find that in Unreal Engine it's quite quick and powerful to get up to speed on using post-processing effects in the overall scene view or viewport in an Unreal Engine project. So let's take a look at how that compares to Unity. So with Unity, using the most recent version of the post-processing stack, you need to download that as an additional plugin from the asset store and enable it in a couple of different ways to make sure that it works with the camera to be able to dial in the overall effects. The way it works in Unreal Engine actually is if
ここ超面白いポイントですね。もうちょっと言ってください。
underneath the Place tab here, we actually have volumes, which you can just simply scroll down through the volumes there and just find the post-process volume stack. And when we drag that in, the difference that you'll find from Unity is that we can define a volume to represent essentially anywhere that we want it to be. We could have it actually represent this entire scene or encompass this entire scene if we want, or we can have it represent or encompass smaller areas. It completely depends on what it is that you want to do. For this example, I'm just quickly dragging this in to place here to be able to show some of the differences that exist between the Unity workflow and here in Unreal Engine. So I have the post-process volume brought in.
はい。Unity の場合はですね、最新のバージョンだと、ポストプロセッシングスタックっていうアセットをですね、ダウンロードしないといけないんですよ。それをですね、この辺で皮肉ってるわけですね。これですね。Let's take a look at how that Unity と比べましょうと。で、新しいバージョンだと、これね、ダウンロードする必要があるよと。で、そのね、いろいろやんなきゃいけなくて、カメラベースだから、カメラにつけなきゃいけないんだけど、V4 は、そこにあるやつをですね、ドラッグ&ドロップして、使いたい範囲にこうやって広げたら、終わりだよという話です。便利。で、一応ですね、Unity の、肩をちょっと持つと、最近、ポストプロセッシングスタックボリュームっていうのが増えて、カメラペースじゃなくなったので、置いて使えるやつも増えました。 はい、終了。パクリです。
exists between the Unity workflow and here in Unreal Engine. So I have the post-process volume brought in and I've scaled it up just to kind of encompass an area. And I have it selected here, post-process volume. And if we come down, we can see that we can get into things like color grading, if we wanted to address things like the shadows perhaps, or some of the midtones or highlights. Let's go down and take a look at something like maybe the exposure is someplace that we might want to play with here. So we could change the minimum brightness. We could put to something like 0.001, and perhaps the maximum brightness here needs to be dialed down to maybe something like 1. That still looks like it's too bright. And there we go. We can start adjusting this to something a little more, bright, or something that is kind of, we're kind of maybe overexposing it here, whatever it may be. We can play with a bunch of different settings on here. One of the other areas down here, let's play with the ambient occlusion on this. I'm just going to turn off our exposure there for a moment and turn on the intensity of the ambient occlusion and maybe adjust the radius a little bit here. So you can see the difference with this is it's very quick to get it lined up in the viewport. It's built right into Unreal Engine. The nice thing about this is that it works in a sense of a volume that you can stack into infinite numbers. You could put small volumes or even giant volumes over top of the entire scene, whatever it may be, that you can layer essentially upon an entire project to get many different effects as you go working with it. So that's the difference there with how Unreal Engine's post-processing works. You can work with it in the sense of a volume base that is built within Unreal Engine, scales like a simple cube, and very quickly be able to start dialing in effects. Now, by no means did I go through all of the different effects here. This was just simply how quick it is to be able to bring in the post-process volume and be able to get real-time post-processing effects in your Unreal Engine projects.
はい。日本だとね、直接的にね、ディスったりすると、割と角が立って、怒られるんですよ。だから皮肉的な表現がね、あるので、それに気づくとね、ちょっと面白いっていうのがあるんですけど、英語圏だと、あんまり直でディスるっていうよりは、こういうのがあって、我々はこの辺がもっとすごいんだよっていう平和的なアピールなので、あんまり傷つかないというところがありますね。
If you're familiar with light baking in Unity, you'll know that typically what you'll need to do is go underneath your window, lighting, and to the settings directory, which will bring up something like this, where all of the settings need to be set overall for what the light mapping resolution will be within Unity here. So Unreal Engine, we work in a very similar way. We do have a couple of other places that we can dial in some parameters for quality as well. So let's switch over to Unreal Engine here into our Zen Garden scene and see how that would work. So something to note here, underneath the settings menu, we have our world settings. And by opening that, if you don't have this tab open already, it will open this tab for you in here. And this overall is where we come down to what we refer to as light mass in Unreal Engine. And light mass is essentially an engine within an engine that will generate the light mapping. It will bake it out depending on how the quality is set or what these parameters are set to here. Now, it's worth noting before we take a look a little more in depth at these, that the actual lighting quality itself can be set through the build settings here. So we can see the lighting quality. I've got this set just to medium right now. We can go into the lighting info to set the density rendering options. You can see that there's some different settings in there. And we can also go in and override everything to a light map resolution adjustment so that if we wanted everything in the scene to be overridden, we can do that. Every object can have its own light map resolution set independently on the object itself as well. So in here, back to our world settings, this is where we have our light mass settings to how these will be calculated or what quality they're going to be output at. Now, underneath this light mass settings here, it's worth noting that we can go to this very bottom here. I'm just going to pull this down a little bit.
この辺はですね、ライティングビルドとかの話ですね。まあ、どのぐらいのクオリティで、ライトの情報をやっつけるかとか、クオリティ設定の話ですね。この辺なんか適当なこと言うと、後で刺されるかもしれないので、ふわっと、流します。
You'll see there's another little arrow down below. So essentially the way this is collapsed, just to show you, is like this with another little arrow down below. So here's all of our different settings, our parameters to as to how we want the quality dealt with here, how smooth overall, the overall quality that it's going to produce for our light map baking. And if we go to the advanced tab here, we can see that I've already calculated out some maps here. So there's actually 6 light maps that have been baked. And if we open this up, there they are. We can actually see what these light maps look like that have been created from Unreal Engine. And just like anything else within Unreal Engine, we can actually go ahead if we wanted to, double click this, and this will open it up in a texture editor where we can get a preview as to what's happening in that light map there. We can see that we have some data stored in a texture format that will allow us to reuse that for the baked lighting in our scene, which this scene is. So we have all of our lights baked into the scene here now so that everything will perform very well and very smooth depending on what it is that we want for our project. So overall, the difference from Unity and Unreal Engine, you may find that you have the option to set the quality here within the build settings, but also to be able to go in and override or set everything to its own resolution, or to an overall resolution, I should say. Whereas you can also go into every single object can have its own independent light map or light map resolution setting, so that in the end, when we go to calculate it, it can be independent from everything else, or you can have one giant global setting. The light mask settings, of course, just like anything else, this is much like a rendering workflow. The higher the quality or the further we push it, the longer it's going to take to calculate that light mask settings. It's also worth noting that Unreal Engine actually uses an agent, almost like a render node in the sense, and it's called Swarm. And what it does is that it can actually be distributable. You can have, if you have a bit of a render farm there, you can distribute this with Swarm as an agent to render the light mask settings here to be able to build out all of the different light maps for your final project. So there's a difference between the Unity light map baking workflow and the Unreal Engine light map baking workflow.
はい。ユニティのライティングの設定ってこんなに細かいのあったかな？知らないだけだと信じたいんですが、クオリティ設定はあった気がします。で、最後に一瞬ちょろっと出てきたレンダーファームっていうのは、ライティングライティングビルドの計算に、めちゃめちゃ時間がかかるケースがあるんですね。超ハイクオリティで、ライティングビルドするときとかね。そういうときがあるので、レンダーファーム、要するに、複数台の PC で計算してやろうっていう方法があるので、必要になったら、ググってねっていう感じでしたね。
Yeah, When working with animation in Unreal, there are some subtle differences from the way that the workflows are within Unity. And there are a lot of overlap. There are some things that we do actually have in common here between these workflows. So just like anything else that we've seen throughout this, there are often different naming conventions, or for that matter, different terminology for reference to certain things. In this case, we're going to look at how we deal with animation, specifically with deformable meshes.
一応ですね、これなんか別のプロジェクトに急に変わりましたね。まあ、まあいいけど。まあ似たようなプロジェクトを出したいときはですね、サードパーソンテンプレートを使うと似たようなマップが出ます。
So let's hop over to Unity. And in this case here, I just have one of Unity's free Kyle robot. It's from their asset store that I'm using here. And the way that this works to bring this in, I want to show really quickly here. If I click on right-click and use Import New Asset, and I'll just bring in that file, we'll see that it plops down this little asset up here, and we get some different controls over here on the right. So we see a model, we see how the rig is being handled, if there's any animation on there, and the materials that are applied to it. So I want to take a look at how this is handled over in Unreal. Before we do that, it's important to mention that in Unity, or in the Unity workflow, this is defined as a skinned mesh. That is a mesh that has a skeleton that is deforming the geometry. So a skinned mesh in Unity is the equivalent to, in the Unreal workflow, what we refer to as a skeletal or skeletal mesh, depending on how you pronounce that. So with a skeletal or skeletal mesh over in Unreal, same idea. A deformable mesh that has a skeleton that is deforming that geometry. Okay.
ですね、Unity のこの辺のスキンドメッシュの設定がとてもわかりにくい。これさ、リグを、まあ、細かい話をしていいですか？この今、右上のリグのタブが押されてると思うんですけど、今もう、アニメーションタイプが、ジェネリックになってて、これをですね、ヒューマノイドにコンバートできるんですけど、コンバートした後に、スケルタルメッシュ、UE4 でいうエピックスケレトン的なやつにリターゲットできるんですけど、そいつの、UI が非常にわかりにくくて、これ、リターゲットの設定をいじってるのか、死んで、いじってるのか全然わかんねえ。ということに衝突したのを今、思い出したのでちょっと言いたくなりました。いや、ではそんなことはないです。
Okay, so let's jump over to Unreal and take a look at the same equivalency there of importing something there. So same idea as in Unity. I already have a little scene set up here. If I right-click here in my content browser, same idea, I can go to Import. Here I have an FBX character. This is one of the free characters available on the marketplace from Epic Games. This is one of their Paragon characters that are free and available to use in your Unreal projects. I'm just using this FBX as an example. The difference here is you're going to see that I now have an FBX import option box that comes up. There's a couple reasons why this is coming up. You know, some of the basic things, if I wanted to set the transformations, you know, the scale or where it's positioned or whatever it may be, or maybe define a different material, whatever it may be that I want to do on there. By default, though, it's going to recognize that this is a skeletal mesh and that I want to import the mesh. But because I have a couple of different skeletons in the scene, specifically another skeleton from the default mannequin from the third person template for Unreal, it is going to want me to define the skeleton that I'm working with in here. So because this character, Decker, I want to define that as the skeleton. Now it's interesting to note, I don't have to. I could work with other skeletons here, but this skeleton is specifically built for this character. So I definitely want to make sure that I click that. And once I click that, it's going to define that as the skeleton and import it in that way. So I'm not going to change anything else on there. I could just simply hit import on that, and it would bring that FBX character in the mesh with the skeleton defined on there. This is just a simple error message here that anytime if there's not a smoothing group on there, it's just going to notify you on that, so we can ignore that. So here I've brought the mesh in and all of the shaders that are with this mesh. Now this mesh has some complex shaders on that. So we'll leave it at that. So the difference here is that when we are importing our meshes here in Unreal, if we have more than one skeleton that we're working with, we need to define that skeleton. We need to tell Unreal what skeleton we want to specifically look at. Now, how this works for now taking the animation and applying it to this world of deformable geometry, or in Unreal speak, a skeletal mesh, is in a different video, and we'll take a look at how we can do that next.
あれ、アニメーションの話出るかと思ったら、インポートして終わった。ちょっと戻って、この辺多分あんまりよくわかんなかったと思うので、一応ね。もうスケルトンっていうのが、ざっくり言うと、ボーンコードですね。で、これが、モデルに合ったやつを入れてあげると、ちゃんとアニメーションとか動くよと。これで、でもアニメーションインポートしたの？インポートしたか見えない。まあ、特に、スケルトンを選択しなくても、インポートできるケースもあります。またスムージングメッシュの選べる。スムージンググループか。なんだっけ。
Or now taking the animation and applying it to this world of deformable geometry, or in Unreal speak, a skeletal mesh, is in a different video, and we'll take a look at how we can do that next.
スケルタルメッシュ。目が入ってるやつ。スケルタルメッシュです。次アニメーションの話か。先を行ってしまった。
We've looked at the differences between a skinned mesh and a skeletal or skeletal mesh in the Unreal world, and how that works when we want to import a deformable mesh that a skeleton is going to work with or deform. In this case here, now we're going to look at applying animation. So I want to take a look at it, the differences between how we work with the basics of that in Unity and the basics of this over in Unreal. So we'll just jump over to Unity here, and we can see we have our simple little robot character. Now the basics of this, the way that we would work with this, is that if we have some animation data available, and here just using the Unity standard assets, I have a couple of animation pieces here that we can work with. The basics of this are that we need to make sure that that animation in Unity works with specific skeletons. And then from there, we define this in a couple of different ways. I'm just going to click on the robot character here. In Unity, they use something called an animation controller to define overall how that's going to drive or control that animation. As well, there's another process here, another attribute called an avatar. So you need to have an avatar defined for the character as well. And that also works with the animation. Unity works with this idea of an avatar in there as well. So I don't want to go in depth. It's certainly not a Unity tutorial on how to animate or anything in here, but I do want to look at the comparables as to the basics here, is how we bring an animation and hook it up to this simple little robot character here. So the difference is this animation controller, which is called player, if we double click on that, it brings us into the animator here. And this is where we have what Unity works with as a basic state machine. You can see different creating states and things like that. Now, in this case here, all I've done is I've been using some of the standard assets here. I just dragged in some of these animations in here. I brought in an idle, and then I hooked up a transition to a walk in here so that this state machine, the basics of it are that we would essentially connect the entry point to a starting point, which in this case is the idle, and then a transition from there. Now, to go further with that, to put in all the controls, there's a bit of work to hook up those transitions and to how they're going to be controlled with the input device. That's the same with any engine, whether it's a keyboard or a controller or the mouse or whatever it may be. We need to have the animation, you need to have the defined character, but you also need to define how you're controlling that animation. So this is just a basic as to what I have in here, and again, not a tutorial by any means as an in-depth how to hook up animation in Unity, but what we do need to keep in mind is how animation is brought in and this idea of working with states, or this idea of working with a state machine, because we're going to look in Unreal, the comparable to that, and we do work with animation in a very similar manner. The difference is the way that Unreal treats a deformable mesh and animation. We put them into basically separate components, if you will, so that they can tie together and have all the control, kind of unlimited, infinite control over how those assets exist. So in this case here, this animator or animation controller and this idea of a state machine defining the default state of an idle and then a transition to a walk. Now let's go over to Unreal Engine.
はい。Unity のアニメーションを再生するときのアニメーターコントローラーっていうセットの話なんですけど、この GUI、ユニが最初に使い始めた3年ぐらい前から1ミリも変わってない気がするのは気のせいですかね。みんなマジでこれ使ってんの？さあ、信じられない。ねえ、もうちょっとさ、なんとかならんかったのか？ということで、アンリアルを見ます。
And see what the comparable to that would be. So I'm just going to hop back over to Unreal Engine. Now what I've done here is when I brought in a character here, I've divided the character up into its deformable mesh, or its skeletal mesh, and that is the character with a skeleton inside it, and I've actually packaged this up into a simple blueprint. Now let's take a look at what that is, and that's this area here. You see it's in blue, and BP stands for blueprint in the Unreal naming conventions. So I've got this character Decker from the Paragon assets, which are free on the Epic Games Marketplace. I'm just going to double click on this and open up the blueprint editor. And there's a couple of things that we have going on in here. These are all the controls that I mentioned before that are actually tying in how animation that we've defined is working with a deformable mesh that we have defined.
この、どうでもいいんだけど、このノードの首バットなので、参考にしないでください。どこがバットかというと、イベントティックで、キャストしてるのは良くないですね。しかもこれ、アニメインスタンスでしょ？変数確認しておいてください。バットです。
And how it's being controlled. Now in this case here, I'm actually using the third person template that's available.
良くないって意味ですね。やっちゃいけないわけじゃないんだけど、あんまりよろしくないので、この組み方はですね、推奨しないよというだけです。
For free with Unreal Engine, and I'm just customizing it to work with my simple little animations, any of them that I decide I want to bring in. So this is the blueprint that essentially ties all of that together. And now let's look at what we refer to as an animation blueprint. So if I double click on this, bring this up, it's going to put it right beside that blueprint editor in there. And this here is an interesting way, and the way that we work with this, I'm just going to jump to the top animation graph. Here is this idea of a state machine. I can bring in animation and tie it into this, any type of pose that I wanted to. Let's take a look at what we have. Here's a jog forward, for example. So if we bring that into here, and I take this result and plug it into that result here, and I'll just compile that, you can see live it's going to give you that preview in this little viewport. This isn't how we would want to work with animation because this is only a one input here in that final animation. So we use, much like the way it works in the Unity workflow, something we refer to as simply a state machine. So I'm just going to...
はい。アニメーション用の走るファイルとか用意しといて、シュッと繋いでやれば再生できるんだけど、それだとバリエーションが出せないので、結局なんかステートマシーン、さっきのユニティみたいなやつで組まなきゃいけないという話ですね。こう適当にやるとスパゲッティみたいになるので気をつけましょう。
delete that out of there. And I'm going to take this result and put it back into there, and I'll just simply hit compile. The reason why I'm doing that is it's compiling what I have going on inside the state machine. Now, if I hover over top of it, it'll give us a little thumbnail preview to see what's going on in there. Let's jump in there. I'm just going to double click that. This is very much like what we just looked at.
これ、さっきよりさ、明らかに見やすいと思うんですよ。
Over in Unity, you can see that I can drag out transitions to add in other animations if I want to, but the basics here are that we have, in this case, just a simple idle animation and a jog forward animation. You can see the difference here is that I've actually gone ahead and taken a little bit further here where I dragged out just simply by dragging on an arrow like this and attaching it to that forward and then dragging back from that jog back to the idle. So I have a transition available to go from an idle state to a jog forward state back to the idle state when I stop running. And then there's the difference here. And this is very similar in Unity. Whenever we want to define when something happens or when it stops, we need to define how those transitions work. So without going into the details here, this isn't an in-depth tutorial by any means of working with animation. We want to do the comparable here. So that's the most important thing to note is this, the similarity here as to what we're seeing here with this idea of defining how animations work with a deformable mesh, a skeletal mesh in Unreal, much like the same way that you would work with it in Unity. So there's the basics of the animation blueprint. I do want to point out a couple of other things here. In this world of an animation blueprint, this is only concerned with how animation is working with a defined deformable or skeletal mesh. So let's take a look at up here on the top right. We can see that we can access all of these different editors in here. If I double click on the skeleton, this is the skeleton editor. And here it gives me all of the different roots inside here, so that I can actually go through this. If I really wanted to, I could go and actually deform this or check that out in here. So this is actually a way that you can see the entire hierarchy of all the bones as they were created in, for example, from Maya or 3ds Max or wherever it may have been created. Over here is the mesh that we're using that skeleton is driving. So what we can also do with that, as you'll see up here on the top right, is we have a mesh editor in here as well. And what this is going to do is this is going to bring us into another editor. And just like the skeleton editor, this only has to do with the mesh, specifically around things like physics, maybe how it's being lit, the materials that we're using, if we need to define levels of detail, different things like that. Now, also in the animation blueprint editor, we also have this ability to go into specifically animation. And we get a very powerful animation editor here that we can work with curves, we can work with a timeline in here, and we can work with this entire browser of all these different animations. Whatever we have available in our scene, we can drag in and work with here. And you'll see that the editors are very much the same setup that you're used to. You have a details panel. You have on the other side here, we have another details panel specific to what we're working with down over here. And we have essentially this content area, this timeline area in here. And all of these work the same. Even if we go back to the skeleton one, asset details on the left, and we can work with that same menu that we just saw over the other side where we're defining the mesh in there. So let's go back to our animation blueprint. Here's our state machine set, and we have something really simple here, right? An idle going to a jog that goes back to an idle on how we define that. So back to our blueprint, which again is only related to necessarily the character itself, the mesh, and how that mesh is going to operate. And then we have our animation blueprint world as to where all our animation data is defined in there. And then we bring that back in and control it all together here in our main blueprint. Now I've gone a step ahead here and I've actually hooked up these controls that are giving us the idea of how we move right and left, and that's defined simply by a get move right, a function. This is blueprint working, visual scripting, and that if I do the opposite of that, it's going to go backward or it's going to go left. If I bring in this get move forward function, and if I do the opposite of that, it's going to go backwards. So by just using two functions, we're able to define right, left, forward, back. And I'm simply just hooking that up, and I'm telling it, make sure that you use the animations that I've brought in, my idle and my walk forward. And I'm simply just setting that up in here. I'm saying mesh, make sure that you bring that animation in and use the default controllers that we have set up in there. So we end up with something like this.
もうなんか真ん中らへん、正直何が言いたいのか、あんまり意図がわからなかったんですが、分かったら教えてほしいんですが、要するにですね、多分この辺ぐらいからが役に立つポイントで、このステートマシーン、要するに走ってるか、止まってるか、状態をステートって呼ぶんですけど、状態を切り替えるのは、このアニメーションブループリントではなくて、ブループリントから切り替えれるよというところですね。この辺もね、難しいのが、どっからどこで入門として説明するか、そういうとこですね。これ難しい問題なんだ、マジで。
Third person controlled character in here with a very simple idle that transitions to a walk, turn left, turn right. And when I stop, it goes back to idle. And that's simply put that we have this defined by the two scenarios here, or the two different blueprints that we were looking at. The blueprint which defines that character and ties all of the controls together, and the blueprint that's concerned more with the world of its animation and how that data is coming in and those transitions, right? So in the end, we define these in two different nodes so that we have full control over these to do whatever it is that we may want to do. And then back in the main blueprint of the character, we're tying all of those animation controls together. So there's a difference there in the way that Unity works with its animation and how Unreal handles animation. But we can see at the end of the day, this idea of states or working with state machines is very similar in how we bring in animation clips, hook them up, define transitions, and of course at the end of the day, just like any other game engine, we need to define how we're controlling that animation, what device is controlling it, a keyboard, a controller, etc. So that's the brief overview of animation comparison between Unity and Unreal animation blueprints.
はい。もう、あとちょっとじゃん。見たな。気が早く。見るか。
Particle effects are a very powerful way to bring a lot of dynamic to a project, whether it's some sort of visualization project or a game or any kind of project that you want to bring a little bit of flair or some sort of effect to. So what I want to do right now is focus quickly on a side-by-side comparable of particle effects as they pertain to Unity and how they work within the Unreal environment. So first thing I'm going to do is switch over to Unity here and just take a quick look at how we would create a particle system and how the attributes or the parameters are available within the inspector in Unity and how they work. And then we're going to take a look at how that works in Unreal. So this by no means is a how to create a special effect using particles within either package. This is a side-by-side where parameters or attributes are. You'll find that there is a lot of common ground between these two, the way things work here as far as particle systems are. But you're going to see in Unreal that, of course, it has its own editor. So it does have its own UI, its own environment to build particles. So let's take a look at Unity here first. The first thing we want to do with Unity is that typically for creating a particle system here, or a basic particle system, we would do a game object, effects, and a particle system. Now I'll just simply place this thing down here. Really all I want to do right now is take a look at the right here on the inspector and see what's going on. Everything is in a stack over here on the right? We can see that it's a particle system. Of course, I could name this to whatever I want it to be. And in here, we see a lot of the basic attributes related to the default setting of that particle system. Now, if we come down here, this is the stack of all of the different attributes and parameters on there, from emission, shape, and so forth. And you can see that just about every attribute or major parameter is stacked here, allowing you to access that if you want to do that. Now let's keep that in mind for a moment, the way that's set up, and let's jump back into Unreal and take a look at how it is set up there for creating a basic particle effect in Unreal. So here we are in Unreal Engine. There's a couple of different ways that we can build a simple particle system here. Now one of them is that we can do an Add New, and we can go up and click Particle System, or just like pretty much anything else in Unreal Engine, I can right-click and go select Particle System. And it's going to highlight a name on here. I'll just call this one my FX. And a couple of things that you'll note here. Off the bat, there's nothing in the thumbnail. And that's because you need to create the effect in there for it to generate a thumbnail for you. And at any time, you can generate a thumbnail for it. But this is the basics. We've just right-clicked, created a particle system. Now, like anything else in Unreal, we want to double-click that, and it's going to open up a particle editor, or what is also known as Cascade. And here we get this separate UI. I'm actually going to dock it right up here beside our main UI.
はい。Unity は、パーティクルシステムってやつを、手裏剣ですね。手裏剣と呼ばれるシステムで、こいつを動かすと。その Unity のエディター上で。で、アンリアルは、何回も押してたのが、ホームエディターがある。っていうところを何回も押してましたね。まあ、あれですね、パーティクル専用のエディターがあるよと。実は便利だから使えた。アンリアルの場合は、カスケードって呼ばれてますね。最近、ナイアガラっていう、別システムが出てきたので、今からカスケードを覚えるよりは、ナイアガラの方がいいんじゃないかなという気がしています。
And what we have here is its own environment, a very powerful particle system environment here to create a lot of amazing dynamic effects. Now again, I'm not going to go in depth into creating powerful effect here, but I am going to go over the side-by-side comparable here. Now where do we compare this here? So here's the difference. Because this is its own standalone UI, particle system, or particle editor for that matter, we can see that we get a simple little viewport. Much like a lot of the other editors within Unreal, we have a details panel, and we have over here kind of this workspace. Okay, so we'll come back to that in a moment. You'll see down below that there's also this handy curve editor. And this is where we can edit any animation associated with any of the particle effects that we create. So up here we have a default emitter. And what this default emitter is going to do for us is allow us to stack in all of those different attributes and parameters. Now by default, it's a particle emitter. And we have a couple of basic things from the initial size, the lifetime, initial velocity, and color, some basic parameters for whatever that thing is that we want to create. Now, if I wanted to create a new emitter, I can simply do this by right-clicking, and I can go into here and I can actually create a new emitter. I can also start to begin to stack in a bunch of different things here. I can create a whole new particle system, but on top of that, down below these two emitter and particle system is where I get all of our different attributes or parameters, or if you want, overall effect as to how we're working with that particle system. So the difference is back in Unity, we saw these already made essentially live for you, and you essentially toggle them on and dial into what you need to do. In Unreal, all of these different attributes are here, and there's a lot of them. If you start to go through all of these different settings in here, they're here, but they're not present for you right off the bat. What happens is that when we create a particle system, it's much like everything else within Unreal that we add components or we add those attributes to it as we go. No different here. So I'm right-clicking to access that, and I can go in and start to add things like maybe a new, acceleration to this, or I might want to add something like an orbit effect to it. And I essentially stack in my attributes in there. Now, it's also important to note how this works, and it's quite simple. Any attribute that I want to work with, the detail panel will give me those attributes related to that specific parameter there. So if I click on lifetime, for example, we see that everything's there, and I can go through and dial in specific things. Now, every area that I stack in here has its own dial in or separate parameters and attributes that allow me to go in and tweak this depending on what kind of effect that I want to build in here. And of course, this is our viewport window in here. One last thing I want to point out in this editor is this toolbar up top. And that's common right across the board within Unreal. All of these different editors will have a toolbar of some kind that's specific to that editor. And this one is no different. What we are seeing here is the common ones where we see a save icon, we can see browse to find things, but we're also seeing a couple of different things here. This thumbnail, for example, will, as I mentioned before, generate a simple thumbnail. It's just basing it off of what we're looking at in the viewport there. So if we go back outside here, we'll see that that updates into our simple little thumbnail. And
基本的にどうやってパーティクルを作っていくか、みたいな話で、コンポーネントを追加して、調整していってね、みたいなところは一緒なんですが、今ちょっと紹介してたサムネイルの話がちょっと面白くて、左上のビューアーで見えてるやつを、なんかスクショみたいなして、セットのサムネイルとして採用できるっていう謎の配慮があって、まあ便利ですね。
the other difference is that we have the ability to turn on things like bounding boxes or turn them off, and they're all visual cues within that viewport. So the difference from what we're seeing over here in Unity is that we are seeing live within the Unity regular viewport a particle system in here, and all of
最後に急にディスが入ってきましたね。
the attributes stacked on the right, and they're all there whether you're using them or not. You essentially turn them on and dial into what it is you want to use. Back over here in Unreal, we have a separate particle editor that allows you to stack in or call upon any of the attributes you require to build an effect. Just to summarize the basics here of this editor, this particle editor, or also known as the Cascade particle system within Unreal, we have a simple viewport, your workspace, like most editors have, a details panel, which would be comparable to the inspector, and we have a curve editor for animation editing, for editing curves related to the overall dynamic effect for that particle system. So there's a quick side-by-side comparison to how we work with particle effect systems from Unity, and if you're translating over to Unreal, how you would access or work with those attributes that are very much the same, but do come within their own particle editor, much like anything else within an Unreal environment as well.
はい。Unity のパーティクルシステムは、必要なコンポーネントを随時 有効にして使ってね、という方式なのに対して、アンリアルのカスケードは、必要なやつを適宜追加してね。それぐらいですね。もうちょいで終わりだ。頑張ってみるぞ。
When it comes to programming or coding or scripting for game engine-based
急に音が悪くなった。
projects, you'll see that there are quite a few similarities or overlaps, but of course there are going to be different ways or different approaches of doing things. Now, this is no different with a Unity workflow compared to here in an Unreal Engine workflow. We're going to look at the similarities here, but we're also going to look at the differences, and that is that in Unreal Engine, we actually provide some real flexibility, some different ways of working. You have these two different paths that you can go on individually, or you can combine them together. And we'll come back to those in a moment, those two different versions or flavors of directions that you can work with in scripting in Unreal Engine. So first, I think what we should do is jump into Unity and take a look at the fundamentals, the basics of scripts as they live and exist within the Unity framework. So I'm just going to jump into Unity here. And by no means is this a scripting tutorial at all. This is just a comparison of how scripts typically work within Unity. Now, it's important to understand that in Unity, there's JavaScript language that is utilized, or C# is one of the more common ones that you'll see here as well. So here we have a script on here, but I'm actually just going to create a simple one. I'll right-click and click Create, and I'm going to use a C# script. Now, C#
一応ですね、Unity 初心者の人に対して言っておくとって言うとなんかすごい上からなんですが、Unity 使えるプログラミング言語が、今残ってるのが、JavaScript と C#、以前はなんか Vue とかあったんですけど、JavaScript で書くと、ググった時に、資料が全然出てこなくて、辛いので、JavaScript の方が簡単だよみたいな、あれがあるかもしれませんが、詳しく最初から C# やる方が幸せになると思います。
Sharp is the language that we're going to be working with in here. I'm going to call this one here, I'll just call it Unity Script. There we go. And we can see that it's a C# script. Up on the right, it has its basic components for this C# assembly. Now, the way Unity works for its script editing capabilities is that it'll utilize an outside editor, and typically if you don't have access to other editors, it'll use the open source MonoDevelop. In this case here, I'm using Microsoft Visual Studio. So I'll just double click on that. It'll open up Visual Studio. And what we'll see here is our UnityScript.cs. We can see that it's a C# assembly, or it's a C# script that we've built in here. And they're the basic components that we saw in Unity. And this, of course, is the framework where I can go in and build my scripts and compile it and then have it back in Unity. By no means am I going to do that, but we can see the basics of a script that we've essentially created in here and loaded into an editor. Well, there's the basics of how we would create that script and be able to do, what you want to do with it is your choice there. But now let's compare that as to how that may work over in the Unreal Engine world here. So I'm just going to jump over to Unreal Engine. A note here before we dive into looking at the different versions or the different ways of working with scripts in Unreal Engine. First, what I want to do is I want to jump over to the Project tab. Now, when you create a new project in Unreal Engine, you're greeted with something like this. Now, I'm running Unreal Studio here, so I have a third additional tab that you may not have. But the typical default Unreal Engine framework, you'll see two tabs, Blueprint and C++. And these are choices really for the direction you want to go in for creating the framework of your project. Now, what is this? Well, Blueprint is visual scripting. That is this kind of node-based scripting where we can access a library of functions and parameters, and we'll take a look at that in a moment. And C++, of course, is using traditional framework of scripting and programming, using the C++ language for building our project here in Unreal Engine. It's very important to note that this does come down to preference here. So regardless of, depending on what your project is or your production pipeline, what you're doing here, at the end of the day, just because you choose one or the other doesn't mean that you're stuck within that framework, only blueprints or only C++. Not at all. You can actually create blueprints within a C++ project, just like you can create C++ scripting within a blueprint project. So on that note, you can see we have all these different templates in here, and of course in the blueprints, the same thing, different templates in there as well. I want to point out that this demo file I'm using here, the Zen Garden project from the Epic Games Marketplace, is built upon a blueprint project. So this is a blueprint project. That doesn't mean that we're stuck within the blueprint world. We can add C++ scripting capabilities at any time. So we'll come to that in a moment. Let's now focus on what this visual scripting is when we talk about blueprints in Unreal Engine. Well, I'm going to go ahead and just create something really simple here to illustrate the power of blueprint scripting within Unreal Engine and how you can access that. So there are many ways to create this, or you can really do this in any way you want, just like you can with traditional scripting. I'm going to use something very simple here. I'm just going to use the simple hello world type of script, but I'm going to build it visually using blueprints, visual scripting. So I'm going to create an empty actor here. Now, if you're familiar with the Unity workflow, this would be like creating an empty game object in here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here. This empty actor, I'm just going to leave the name of this. It's essentially a placeholder. It's a place that I can stack a couple of components in. Because I'm creating that traditional kind of hello world type of script, I just want some text on the screen. So I need two basic components. One is that I need a billboard rendering ability to actually render our text out to make it display and make it visually available within our project playback. And the other thing I need to do is add another component here where I can add text into here. So actually what I want to do is we'll do a text render. And there it is. I'm just going to leave those things the same name. And underneath the text render, I'll leave billboard alone, but underneath text render, the only thing I really want to change in here is maybe the alignment horizontally. Maybe I'll make that center. And I think the size probably needs to be something maybe 75 or 80. That's good at 80. Maybe we'll change the color of the text. Something like maybe...
はい。なんか中途半端だけど一回切ります。ユニティだと、ビジュアルスタジオとか、モノデベロップとか使って、C シャープをそのまま、ゴリゴリ書く感じなんですけど、アンリアルだと、最初のプロジェクトを作る段階で、ブループリントだけか、C プラのプロジェクトか、選べるんですよ。まあね、だいたい、楽しんで作る分には、まあ、ほぼブループリントだけで済むので、まあ、そっちでいいかなという気がしています。その後、もっと何やろうとしてかというと、ハローワールドっていう、プログラミング言語を勉強するときに、最初に出てくる、お決まりのやつですね。それを出すために、なんかアクターで、リストを入れて、調整中のように。
And you can see that there's a text box here, and we can put whatever we want in here. I'm just going to leave it as text as a placeholder for now because I want to be able to control that with our scripting. Now, I'm just going to rotate this around here just so it's just towards the camera. It doesn't need to be at all. It can be wherever we want it to be, but that's fine for now. So we've got this placeholder essentially. I want to translate this into a script. I want to use some visual scripting now. So I'm going to click this blueprint add script button. And what it's going to do, it's going to ask me where I want to store that blueprint. Well, in using this Zen Garden project, it just conveniently happens to have a blueprint folder in here. You can place this wherever you want, but it is good practice to store it underneath a good categorized project directory there. So I'm going to put it in the blueprints. And again, following good practice here when working with Unreal, I'm going to use the proper naming convention here. And BP underscore is typically what we'll use to indicate that it's a blueprint function in here. I'm just going to call this Hello World. So there we have BP underscore Hello World. Now when I create Blueprint, when I click this button, it's going to create a node and then it's going to create, bring up an editor. So let's hit that. It's going to open up the Blueprint editor and we'll come back to this in a moment. I'm actually going to just shut that right down because I want to show this here. This is the little node, the little visual scripting node, BP underscore Hello World. So I'll just double click that. It'll bring up pretty much exactly what we just saw there with a placeholder and a viewport. But the event graph is the most important area here. Now, this isn't a tutorial for, diving in depth into visual scripting or blueprints here in Unreal Engine. But I'm going to create something really simple just to illustrate how this world of scripting works in Unreal Engine. So you can see up here, right-click to create new nodes. Well, that's exactly what we want to do. I'm just going to grab this tab and dock it up here beside my main area here, my main project here. So I'm just going to right-click in here and you can see all of the different events and functions that we have available in here. These are all different categories and it really is endless. There are endless components and different functions and events in here that we can work with, much like you would work with in a traditional scripting world, but these have been created in a visual base or node based so that you're essentially plugging them together, taking functions or events or variables and parameters and plugging them together to create these scripts in a very visual and node-based structure. So I'm going to start out with something really simple in here. I want to add an event. So I want to add a begin play. Just click on that and literally what this is going to do is when I hit play on my project, I'm going to tell it to draw or render out some text in here. So that's the next thing I need to do is kind of add in that text in there. So I might want to do something like a text render or set text render. It gives me these two nodes. I'll just bring this guy up here. And now I will join the event begin play into the set text. And there we've done our first simple scripting here. We've now connected that when I hit play, something's going to happen. It's going to draw some text that I'm going to define. Well, I need to define that. I need to plug that into this value here. To do that for this example, I'm going to do a text render. We're going to use a make literal. There it is down there underneath text, make literal text. And it's going to give me this value that I'm just going to plug into there. And I'm just going to type into here whatever that is I want it to say. In this case, I'll have it say hello world. And there we have it. And that's it. We have three nodes plugging into another node. So we've done, essentially, by connecting these, we've developed or built a script. And just like any regular scripting, whether you're doing it in a shell or something like Visual Studio or whatever it is that you're using as your editor, we need to compile it. So up here in the top left corner, we can see some little gears with a question mark. I'm going to tap that button, and we'll see that a green check mark means that everything is good with the code here, that it has compiled properly. So I'll get back out of that and go back to my project. There's our placeholder text. But now if I hit play on the project, there's our hello world that we can see in place. And as it changes cameras, we're able to see that simple little script that we built there with our hello world code-based simple script. So there we've had a good quick overview of blueprints with that really simple example. And we're working within a blueprint project. But now,
はい。ビーンプレイっていうのが、最初に実行される。プレイを押すと、最初に呼ばれるとこで、セットテキストっていうのが、最初になんか、その人が追加してた、テキストレン
it's
ダ
a
ー
blueprint function.
どこだっけどうしようか。この辺。で、テキストレンダーを追加して、で、そのテキストの中身を、で、ハローワールドに 書き換えるよっていうのを入れてあげました。そうすると、実行したときに、難しいな。
Good with the code here that it has compiled properly. So I'll get back out of that and go back to my project. There's our placeholder text. But now if I hit play on the project,
で、今実行したから、さっきのテキストから、ハローワールドに置き換わったよっていうデモですね。でこのカメラワークは、最初からこの、レベルにあるやつですね。おしゃれなやつは、今つけたわけではありません。
there's our hello world that we can see in place. And as it changes, here we've had a good, quick overview of blueprints with that really simple example. And we're working within a blueprint project. But now what if we want to work with building some scripts, much like we saw over there in Unity? Well, you can. And it's important to understand that if we were in a C++ project, we can drop down and build blueprints just like we're working with in here. But because we're in a blueprint project, what we actually want to do is right-click anywhere that you're typically working if you want. And I'm going to go to add in a new C++ class. What this is going to do is it wants me to choose a parent class on this. You know, you can see all the different categories in here from a character, different actors, components, whatever it may be in here. I'm just going to create an actor, much like we did with that basis of our blueprint in there. I will just call this in here my actor script, and we'll go ahead and hit create class. Now it's important to note what's happening here. This is a blueprint project that has a blueprint project directory structure, and what it needs to do is take this C++ code and insert it into that project directory structure here. So it's actually compiling that C++ code, as we can see in the bottom right hand corner here. And what it's going to do is insert that into our overall project so that we have the ability to work with this in much like we would typically want or expect a script to be accessible. So by being able to build this code here, it will allow us to open this up into a simple editor, and we'll be able to edit that code here. And there we can see that we have our actorscript.cpp for the Epic Zen Garden. And it, of course, has this actorscript.h in there. And we have all the basic components like we would be used to, like we saw over there with the C#. We're able to now go in and do all of our scripting that we'd want to do for whatever it is that we want to do. And then in the end, of course, compile that and bring it back to our project. So there it is right there. We can see that there's a folder here, C++ classes. Drop in any of our scripts in there. So that's a real quick overview of a comparison, you know, a side-by-side look at Unity with its scripting using C#. Of course, you can use JavaScript there as well. And how we work here in Unreal Engine using these two different ways. One in the traditional sense of using coding or scripting using C++ as a language, and another way using visual scripting in what we refer to as blueprints in Unreal Engine projects.
なんか今飛ばなかった。おう。もう一回飛んでみてよ。勝手に飛んだ気がするんだ。
Review here has this actorscript.h in there, and we have all the basic components like we would be used to, like we saw over there with the C#. We're able to now go in and do all of our scripting that we'd want to do for whatever it is that we want to do, and then in the end, of course, compile that and bring it back to our project. So there it is right there. We can see that there's a folder here, C++ classes. Drop in any of our scripts in there. So that's a real quick overview.
ここ。この辺。急にさ、シュッとなくなったんだけど。
So there it is right there. We can see that there's a folder here, C++ classes.
ここ。なんでそこまでやっといて。そこまでやっといて。
Using these two different ways. One in
謎だな。今回謎すぎる。そしたらあと5分ぐらいで終わるはず。やったぜ。
When it comes to the actual build or packaging of our final project here in Unreal Engine, there are a couple things that we'll see that overlap from if you're used to the Unity workflow for the build and run. Let's quickly take a look at how we work with this in the Unity world here. You know, of course, if we've got all of our different settings for our light maps, that's a different thing as we discussed before, and how we bake those out and we have everything set. Essentially, what we want to do is be able to come under the File menu here and go.
ほぼ最終回にして、ようやくアセットを入れてもらえた。悲しいユニティ。
build settings, and we have this basic menu where we would select our platform as to where we're building this out to. But a lot of our key settings exist underneath this player settings here in Unity. So this is where you set things like, you know, any kind of company names or icons or splash screens or resolution for the final presentation of it, and anything else that you want to add into that. And then you essentially hit build, or build and run for that matter. Let's see how that compares over in Unreal Engine. So in
はい。一個だけ、多分、ユニティなんですね。仕様なんですが、PC にビルドするときと、iOS、Android、UWP など、別プラットフォームに、ビルド、要するに実行ファイルを作りたいってなったときに、スイッチプラットフォームっていうのをしなきゃいけなくて、これが非常に時間がかかるので、どうだったんだろうね。悲しいよね、これ。この間何もできないんだよ、マジで。
build and run for that matter. Let's see how in Unreal Engine. So in Unreal Engine, we have a lot of the basic settings there that we want to change exist in very much the same way. The difference here is that we want to go underneath Edit Project Settings and be able to access a couple of things here, like, for example, description. This is where we can define things like we saw over there in the Unity setting if you're used to that. Things like company name, you know, putting in things like support contacts or a web page perhaps for the home page, filling in legal information, you know, anything like that that you want to be set there. Now, if it's a VR project or game, you can set to start it in VR as well. Another thing that's very important here is underneath the About tab, you can see that we have, this is the Zen garden project that we're looking at as an example. And here's a project thumbnail that's defined, and then we can see that we have in here as well, we can define the publisher. Of course, any of these we have already covered, actually, taking a look at that, the publisher, the company name, and things like that. But here's where we can define, you know, things like a thumbnail. Another important thing is under maps and modes. This is where it's always best to select the startup map if you have more than one map. If you remember in Unreal Engine, the equivalent in Unity, which is the scene file, we work with maps. So it saves it as a .u map. Now, this is where we want to define if we have more than one map here, we want to make sure that we aren't setting it to what Unreal Engine calls as a default map if we start with a blank map. We want to define it to the map or the level that we want this project to start on. If it's a visualization or some sort of game, we want it to be able to define what the startup map is and overall what the default map. In this case, they're both the same here as well. So that's the basics of the some of the description settings, the maps and modes settings to how we want to start with that. So let's go now into the file package.
はい。今のとこ割と重要な設定で、これですね。マップのアイコン、真ん中の茶色っぽいやつのある2つの設定なんですが、上がエディタースタートマップ、下がゲームスタートマッ 違うか。エディター、デフォルトマップと、ゲームデフォルトマップかな。でこれをちゃんと設定してあげないと、ビルドしたときに、あれってなります。で、上のエディターデフォルトマップは、アンリアルのエディターを開いたときに、最初に出てくるマップの設定です。で、下は、ビルドして実行ファイルにしたときの最初のマップの設定です。なので、ビルドする前は、下のね、設定を、ちゃんとチェックしてあげてください。そうだ。
Package project setting. And just like in Unity where we need to define the platform, we would do it right here. So we could go into, say, for example, Android or whatever it may be. We're going to go into Windows, and we would go into our Windows 64-bit configuration. And simply by hitting that, that's going to ask us for a path as to where we want to build our project. And we simply hit build and give it its amount of time that it may need, depending on the settings we have for the project or how big the project is. And the project will package up into a Windows executable, into a nice compressed or packaged folder where everything is in place to be portable or transportable as an executable package or project. So there's a real brief overview or kind of side by side as to how Unreal Engine or the Unreal world of building a project works for building out your packaged final project as it compares to the Unity world of the build and run or build concept of building out a final package there.
はい。まあ、最後は、Windows の64ビット版でビルドすれば、まあ、どれも一緒なんだけど、なんかどこに持ってっても、実行できるよみたいな、なんか、ふわっとした話ですよね。はい。終わりかな。
Building out a final package there.
あと一個だ。やったぜ。
When it comes to transitioning from Unity to Unreal Engine, there are many areas that fit under the category of common ground. Quite often, the workflows may be somewhat similar, but the terminology quite different. As we've seen throughout this course, there are many times that this is the case. However, there are also many powerful ways to work with Unreal Engine. For more in-depth learning of Unreal Engine, check out the other courses available. Thanks for joining, and I hope you enjoyed the course.
終わったー。やったー。Congratulations. Find another class. つら。もう終わっちゃった。はい、終わりましたー。やったー。終わったー。まあ、最後のはですね、お決まりですね。なんかもっと詳しく知りたかったら、このコースを見ろ。あ、それそうなんだよな。はい、という感じでした。いやー、長い。長いな。でも知ってることばっかりだった。一個だけわかんなかったけどね。F キーのフォーカス。あれどうやってやるんだろう。まあいいや。一応ですね、個人的にメモってたポイントがあって、1、2、3、4、5、6、7、8、9、10、11? まあ11点ぐらいあ、もう4時間。やば。 2時間ってどうまあ、そうか。なんか11個ぐらい知ってればいいかな、ポイントは。最初のなんか3つはいらないの。うーん。これ、そんなに、意味あるかと言われると、微妙だなぁ。もうちょっとなんかなんでもないっす。ユニティ、いや、UE4 のいいところが、改めて、認識できた、最高のビデオ教材でした。こんな感じです。はい。一応なんかね、これを元に、簡単にね、簡単に、他の人に説明する資料を作ろうかなと思ったんだけど、あんまり参考にならなかったら、いいか。もうこの辺説明すりゃいいのかというね、簡単な当たりがついたので、よしとしましょうか。はい。いや、長々、お疲れ様でした。本当に。長かったね。はいはいはい。これなんか、覚えとくポイントの、なんだ、10個みたいなのまとめて、3、40分ぐらいで、埋めて済む可能性があるので、気が向いたらやります。はい、じゃあお疲れ様でした。バイバイ。よいしょ。